Chapter 193. Voldemort Threatens the South. Wednesday, May 29, 1996. 3 days to full moon presidential Palais Young Democratic People's Republic of Corey Horcruxes left. 2. Snake, Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 4, 1% chance of end of civilization. Voldemort straightened his uniform and looked over the crowd. It was time to deliver his new speech. Dispensing with the traditional microphone, he pointed his wand at his throat and spoke the word, sonorous. This would allow his voice to carry so it could be heard all over the plaza. Good afternoon, fellow comrades. I apologize for the short notice, but I believe that you, as fellow citizens of our great land, need to know the information that our intelligence agency has just uncovered. I promised you shortly after I took office that I would make a full investigation into Comrade Kim Jong-il's death. The preliminary cause of death was heart attack, and all of the doctors who examined the body were convinced that this was the case. However, it appears that we have all been deceived. I ordered several members of the Ministry of Magic to conduct a more detailed psychic evaluation. What they discovered shocked me and should shock you. Voldemort stared into the crowd. My predecessor, your dear leader, was murdered by South Korean agents in an attempt to take over the North. It is obvious that the capitalists have not given up on their attempt to stop us. There was a gasp from the crowd, followed by worried muttering. Our surveillance cameras captured several shots of a woman named Choi Yoon in the presidential palace shortly before Kim Jong-il's death. She was accompanied by several people wearing robes with whom I was not familiar. The key point here is that Choi Yoon was a witch who defected to the south and returned to avenge herself on her homeland. Most damning of all was a hidden video camera which caught the entire episode in Kim Jong-il's office. The only way I was able to find it was by casting a spell to look for possible traps in the room. This camera revealed the enemy wizards casting curses upon our beloved leader, dropping him like a sack of grain. Our valiant soldiers were able to neutralize many of the enemy wizards, including Choi Yoon herself, whose wand I have taken as a trophy. Voldemort raised Choi Yoon's wand in the air for the crowd. The question now is how exactly my government is going to respond to this incident. The most obvious solution is for us to resume hostilities against the South. However, I doubt anyone here wants war. I certainly don't. Many of you may remember the fighting in the 1950s, and you know the horrors which took place over that period. Inevitably, when wars start up, thousands of people are killed, and the fighting only stops when a couple of people make an agreement across a conference table. My friends, I must be honest with you. Kim Jong-il may have been a great man, however, he was not a wizard. In order to be a wizard, a candidate must pass rigorous leadership and character evaluations. Considering that our previous leader relegated most of you to the peasantry, I doubt he would have shown the qualities which would have allowed him to graduate a wizarding school. I, on the other hand, have passed these tests. Whereas Kim Jong-il could only think of war, I can take a more measured view. Here is what I demand from the South in compensation for the assassination of our former president. First, I demand that the South hand over all political prisoners and the equivalent of $500 million, payable over 20 years. This is all for past grievances, and it will help the ordinary citizens of our great nation to rise up out of their poverty. Once that is done, the business of healing can begin. This business of healing brings up my second demand. Voldemort pointed south. My second demand is that I and the leader of the South have weekly summits where the two of us could iron out differences and help end all these years of bloodshed. We will speak to each other as civilized adults, just the two of us. If the leader of the South wishes protection during these summits, he may bring as many Muggle soldiers as he wishes. I will bring no more than 5 members of my Ministry of Magic. The only thing I require is that the South not include any wizards in their delegation. They must understand that many members of my government, including a few in the Ministry of Magic, will be a bit uncomfortable around Southern wizards given what has happened. Voldemort began wrapping up his speech. South Korea, that is my proposal. You can answer in one of two ways. Refuse one or more of these terms, and my government will interpret your refusal as a hostile act which will be met with grave consequences. Accept these terms, and we will likely be able to reach a permanent peace. It is up to you, our friends from the South. What do you want, war or peace? Holding his hands out to the crowd, he shouted, "What, my friends, is your answer, war or peace?" The crowd began chanting in unison, "Peace, peace, peace." Voldemort bowed in acknowledgement to the crowd, and they all screamed even more loudly. Out of sight of the television cameras, he permitted a grin to sneak onto his face. He figured that it would take 5 or 6 wizards, including Voldemort himself, to neutralize 50 Muggle soldiers, Imperius the South's president, and obliviate the entire Southern delegation into thinking nothing was wrong. Most citizens of both Koreas were about to get their wish of a unified Korea. What they did not know, however, was that it was going to be ruled not by someone from the South, but by one of the most powerful wizards ever to walk the earth, Lord Voldemort. He wondered how well Lucius Malfoy would do as the military governor of South Korea. South Korean's Central Intelligence Agency location, classified South Korea. Park Hae-seung turned off the television broadcast and frowned. Something seems very wrong here. We may have a problem. The head of intelligence service raised his eyebrows. Oh, what do you mean? Chang Sung-tik is behaving very strange. Although Chang is correct when he says that most of the North Koreans don't know him very well, our agency does. And I can tell you immediately that he's acting entirely out of character. He's also using lots of colloquialisms, which none of our informants ever heard him use. I suspect he's an impostor who never actually spoke with Chang Sung-tik. Park paused for effect. And there's one thing even more significant. Our Ministry of Magic is absolutely certain that Chang Sung-tik is not a wizard. No one from the Korean Wizarding School, which impartially serves both South and North, by the way, had any idea that this man had magical abilities. The head of intelligence frowned. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that some wizard has taken advantage of the chaos triggered by Choi Yoon's coup attempt, thrown the real Chang Sung-tik into a ditch somewhere, and cast a spell to make himself look like Chang Sung-tik so he could succeed Kim Jong-il? That is exactly what I'm thinking, sir. The new Minister of Magic has informed me that it is possible for wizards to disguise themselves as other people. The most common method is to use a magical concoction known as the Polyjuice Potion. The head of the intelligence service suddenly blanched as the implications hit him. He's trying to get on everyone's good side and has killed off the rest of Kim Jong-il's family. And he's conveniently reminding the world about the coup just so he can have a casus belli if he needs one. Park nodded slowly. That's what I'm afraid of. He may be thinking unification under his rule. We need to talk to the Ministry of Magic and the President. Unfortunately, we have no real way to prove it. It's not like we can just go over there and ask, "Hi, are you an evil wizard masquerading as Chang Sung-tik?" He'll probably just deny it and kill the accuser. Come to think of it, given his popularity, the North Korean citizens will tear the accuser apart before their dear leader gets a chance. The head of the intelligence service thought for a moment. Actually, there may be something we can do after all. Our former Minister of Magic explained that all wands were registered by some mysterious central agency. All we may have to do is dig through our agent's recordings of his speeches from inside the press box and find good shots of Chang Sung-tik's wand. Once we have those, we send those to the Minister of Magic and ask him to forward them to this Diolanus, or whatever his name is. That way, we'll be able to identify him. Park frowned. What if he doesn't use his own wand? Then we work with the Ministry of Magic to figure out which organization the wand's owner or the owner's assassin, if he was killed, belongs to, and trace it back up to the ringleader, who is almost certainly the man in charge of North Korea. Park chuckled. That's not a bad idea, sir. I'll get to work on it right away. Chapter 194. Nagini on TV. Wednesday, May 29, 1996, 3 days to full moon. Rogers Reptile House, 5:30 p.m. Leeds, Great Britain. Horcruxes left. 2. Snake, Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 4. Nagini was getting tired of sitting in this box. She needed to get on with her mission of capturing Karkaroff, and she needed to get away from the chap in the box across from her who wouldn't shut up. She was increasingly convinced that Belle was somewhat interested in her. She was definitely interested in him, but more as lunch than as a possible partner. The humans clearly didn't like her. Not only had they put her in a box, but they had removed her venom sacs while she had been asleep. How was she supposed to kill prey without her venom sacs? She had a very satisfying vision of opening her jaws wide and swallowing the man from the front of the store in one gulp. Life in the glass box had become relatively routine at this point. She would be fed mice every day or so. Although they kept her stomach full, more often than not they gave her cold mice which weren't even alive. Not only was there no excitement of the kill, but they didn't even taste good. She looked across at Belle again, who was making the moves on her and wanted to show her his mouse. She groaned as he started waving a mouse in her face. Hey, I got a mouse. I got a mouse. Whenever a human came in, she would glance at the entrance and check if it was Voldemort or Karkaroff. Inevitably, it wasn't. Voldemort had assured her, however, that he was aware of her predicament and would come and get her once he figured out where she was. Nagini hoped that he'd discover her soon. There had only been one bit of excitement over the past week. About 6 days ago, a large group of humans had entered the store with an odd assortment of Muggle objects. She didn't recognize any of them and was surprised when they had all walked up to her and began looking at her. She had looked at them curiously. Was one of them going to buy her and take her to Voldemort? After speaking to each other in language littered with Muggle terms she didn't recognize, they had nodded and touched something on one of the pieces of equipment. A bright light had shone in her face, just what she had needed when she was already irritated. Wonderful, as the man from the front of the store began standing next to her, pointing at her and speaking in his strange language. 30 seconds later or so, the man had finished speaking and the light had turned off. The Muggles had then dismantled their equipment and then left the store. She had been extremely puzzled by this and turned to Belle to ask him what had just happened. This, of course, had proven to be a big mistake. Not only did Belle not know what had happened either, but he had given him yet another opening to start talking. And once he started talking, he wouldn't stop. Peter Pettigrew had never thought that he would be hiding out among the Muggles. He despised the Muggles and considered them to be inferior to wizards. Unfortunately, he had no choice but to live in a Muggle community at this point. Much to his horror, Scrimgeour had somehow managed to figure out that he, and not Sirius, had been responsible for the Muggle attacks over a decade ago, and that Sirius had been wrongfully convicted. Parchments with his name and face on them had sprouted up all over Wizarding Britain next to those of Lucius Malfoy and the Dark Lord. Pettigrew lamented the fact that a good, pure-blood wizard like himself was no longer welcome in Wizarding Britain. At the moment, he was watching television in a room in a luxurious Muggle hotel. Muggle money was not an issue, as he had been able to conjure various high-denomination Muggle banknotes while no one had been watching. The hotel had many fewer amenities than even a budget wizarding hotel, and the few amenities it did have generally required knowledge of Muggle technology, which he didn't have. Waste of money, he thought. He had at least figured out how to turn the television on, so he flipped through the channels to see if he could find an interesting program. He eventually stopped on the Discovery Channel, which was showing a program on magical animals. Pettigrew was amused to find that a good half of the information the show reported on magical creatures was incorrect. Basilisks did not fly, dragons did not speak, and the Strals weren't visible to people who were on drugs. He suspected he knew why the show hadn't been given proper information. Scrimgeour and the rest of the ministry likely had their hands full searching for Voldemort and dealing with the werewolf pandemic, just 3 days to go until showtime. He supposed that Scrimgeour would eventually get around to telling the Muggles the truth, but in the meantime, he could just watch and chuckle. The broadcast then shifted to a commercial break. Pettigrew nearly fell over when he saw an advertisement which suggested that people spend 3,000 galleons for a large moving vehicle which was powered by gasoline. If he had 3,000 galleons, he'd buy a fancy broom and send any children he eventually had to Hogwarts, assuming they were in Slytherin, of course. He was about to turn the television off when a familiar face suddenly came on screen. A very familiar face. Pettigrew dropped his wand in shock when he realized who it was. It was Nagini. The markings were unmistakable. The commercial continued, and the view widened to show that she was trapped in glass cage, which said that she was going for £319 and 95 pence. A few seconds later, he saw several other cages filled with animals. There were primarily snakes, birds, and other reptiles. Pettigrew couldn't believe what he was seeing. Voldemort's familiar had been captured and was being sold in a Muggle pet store. Someone would pay for this treatment of a Death Eater. The camera panned over to focus on a tall man in casual clothing. The man waved at the camera and began to speak. "Hello, I'm Roger Uxbridge, owner of Roger's Reptile House, Leeds's finest brokerage for exotic pets. We specialize in reptiles, such as snakes, birds, lizards, and so forth. However, we have several furry friends as well, including a few degus and guinea pigs. You can get cats and dogs anywhere, but where can you get unusual creatures like this? Nowhere else, I promise you that." He pointed at Nagini. "Take a look at this specimen over here. This is the largest snake in our collection, a 12-foot female green viper. She was captured maybe 10 kilometers away by animal control agents who were told that she had threatened a pet ferret. We tranquilized the animal, brought her here, and removed her venom sacs. She seems to be getting accustomed to captivity now, and you can have her for only £319 and 95 pence. Pettigrew frowned. Nagini had been devenomed. Voldemort was probably furious. The snake's venom had kept Voldemort alive between his demise at the hands of the Potters and his possession of Quirrell 6 years ago. Voldemort had to be careful either to stay alive or to find someone to possess next time he was incapacitated. The commercial continued, and the proprietor pointed at the snake nearest Nagini. "This one here is a 7-foot-long python. He is a bit of a joker as he likes to show off his kills for the big snake. He's going for £139 and 95 pence. Over here, on this side of the room, is a rare scarlet macaw who will almost certainly outlive his owner. He'll go for £9,995. Do not fear, however, we've got creatures for every budget. However, if you want an exotic animal as a new pet, don't hesitate to contact us. We're open Monday through Friday from 8:00 a.m. to 5:00 p.m. Our address is 164 High Street, Leeds. Our phone number is..." Peter didn't even bother listening to the phone number. 164 High Street, and in this town. First thing tomorrow morning, he would rescue Nagini from the pet store and return her to Voldemort. This would atone for all the mistakes he had made. Ideally, he would have just apparated in there and taken her, but he was still a bit leery of using magic in a place where Muggles could identify him. He immediately started planning what he would do tomorrow morning. Dumbledore nearly fell off his chair when he saw the television commercial. Some Muggles had found a snake which looked a lot like Nagini. She was in Leeds, in a pet store. There was one way to tell for certain, however, if they had found another Horcrux. He summoned Karkaroff. Dumbledore then walked to his pensive, retrieved his memories of the commercial, and showed them to the former Death Eater as he entered. Karkaroff took one look at the snake and nodded. "Merlin's beard, Professor. That's Nagini all right. We've caught a break, it appears. I doubt Voldemort even knows she's there. It's unlikely that he watches Muggle television. Dumbledore laughed and conjured some Muggle currency for him. I would suspect so, Igor. The store supposedly opens at 8:00 tomorrow morning. I want you to take the sword of Gryffindor this evening from Minerva's office. She'll lend it to you as soon as she hears what I'm about to say, and give it to Sirius Black at Grimmauld Place. Once you've done that, go to the store as soon as it opens and buy Nagini. Tranquilize her before leaving the store and take her to Sirius, who will destroy her with the sword. Karkaroff grunted. Why can't I do it? Dumbledore shrugged. The sword is meant to be used by Gryffindors, Igor. I'm sorry, but it's just not appropriate. At any rate, will you do this for us? Karkaroff nodded. I will, Professor. I swear upon my life. Dumbledore shook Karkaroff's hand. Thank you, Igor. Good luck tomorrow. Chapter 195. Clinton announces the invasion. Wednesday, May 29, 1996. 3 days to full moonoval office White House, Washington. Deke United States of America Horcruxes left. 2. Snake, Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 4 President Clinton stood in front of the camera. Deep down inside, he couldn't believe he was going to be giving this speech. As little as 3 weeks ago, an announcement like this would have been unthinkable. However, the world had changed. It was amazing how strongly a couple of people with an airplane could change the world. Radner had chuckled when he had mentioned that observation to the world. The wizard had responded by providing an obvious counterexample, the spur-of-the-moment decision by the president of Blast Cola to film a Super Bowl commercial in England. Clinton had to concede that the Super Bowl breach had more of an impact in that it exposed the wizards to begin with. Were it not for the wizards, there would have been no America for humans. Had there been no America for humans, the Quabin attack and its aftermath would not have taken place. He looked into the camera and began to speak. My fellow Americans, it is my duty to inform you that I have just taken the first step towards avenging the loss of the 7,000 people killed in Massachusetts terror attacks. About half an hour ago, I was shaking hands of our valiant troops at a top-secret Air Force base as I wished them the best of luck in our attack on Afghanistan. Yes, you heard me right. We're going into Afghanistan to dismantle Al-Qaeda and ensure that terror attacks of this magnitude do not happen again. I was hoping not to have to do this and had beseeched the Afghan government to hand over the terrorists. They did not do so, however, so I had no choice but to authorize this operation. Over the next 3 weeks, 550,000 troops will be heading into Afghanistan into harm's way. Most of them will be American, which is appropriate as we were the people most affected by the attacks. However, we will not be alone in this endeavor. Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, Israel, the United Kingdom, and several other nations will be helping us. We will be serving as part of a powerful international coalition whose sole purpose is to keep the world safe for democracy. The struggle will be long and difficult, and it is quite possible that many of these brave men and women will lose their lives in the defense of freedom. However, I assure you that we will prevail. The Afghan army has exhausted itself fighting a civil war against Muslim insurgents, and is currently not in a position to put up much of a fight. If everything goes as planned, the operation will be finished before Labor Day, and all of these soldiers will be home celebrating that holiday with their families. Several wizards will be accompanying these troops. They will be dressed like ordinary soldiers, but will have wands hidden in their uniforms. Their orders are to only use these wands against enemy wizards. Al-Qaeda has caused a great injustice by allowing one of their wizards, Mohammed Damil, to attack Muggles. America will not stoop to that level. Furthermore, all of our troops have been ordered to stay away from civilians. Our quarrel is not with the Afghan people. It is with Al-Qaeda, and only Al-Qaeda. Some of you may think that we are invading Afghanistan because it is a Muslim nation. That is not the case. Yes, many members of Al-Qaeda claim to be Muslim. However, the religious practices these men observe are nothing like what Mohammed preached. Islam is a religion of peace. Ask any cultural scientist, Arab citizen, or scholar. The Allah of Islam is the same God Moses and Jesus worshipped. We are not fighting Islam or Allah, my fellow Americans. Far from it. In one sense, Allah, or as we say God, has chosen us to be his instrument of punishment for Al-Qaeda. You heard me, my fellow Americans. We are the instrument of God's will. I would like to take a moment of silence so we can pray for the safety of our troops and wish them good luck on this mission. Clinton closed his eyes and bowed his head. He sure hoped that this would work, and that Al-Qaeda either didn't have that nuke or lacked the guts to use it. He had debated taking his wife and daughter and leaving for a secure location, but had ruled that out fairly quickly. People would ask why, and he would appear to be a chicken. Decisions like this could cost him the election in November. He opened his eyes and resumed his speech. When I took office 4 years ago, I had never even considered the possibility that I would be the one to lead America to war. Had someone told me that I would be supervising an invasion of Afghanistan, I would have laughed in his face. Well, ladies and gentlemen, times change. I freely confess that I am as surprised and disturbed as you are by this sudden change of events. I can only hope that I will be able to honor the trust you placed in me 4 years ago and lead the nation with pride during the difficult months to come. May God bless us, our troops, and the United States of America. Ministry of Magic, London. Rufus Scrimgeour pleaded with Dionysus' fish patroness. I understand you're busy helping us search for Voldemort Grand Mugwump. Unfortunately, there isn't much time left to plan here. In 3 days, Harrison Cooper is going to turn into a werewolf and attack everyone on that boat. By the time the people he attacks transform into werewolves themselves, they will have left the boat and returned home to places all over the world. This is our last chance, sir. There is one werewolf left, and that is Harrison Cooper. Retrieve him, and you've contained the pandemic. Delay too long, and the pandemic may start up all over again as an international incident, which will likely drag you into it. There was a brief pause, after which the fish spoke with Dionysus' Greek-accented English. I see your point, Minister Scrimgeour. Much as I dislike the possibility that Voldemort could be doing something behind our backs, the fact that there is a hard deadline here June 1st makes this a much higher priority than finding a dark wizard who likely does not want to be found. You have my complete support, Scrimgeour. Scrimgeour breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate this, and it's better to get this out of the way now than later when everyone has dispersed all over the world. How many nations are represented on that boat? Scrimgeour shook his head. I don't know, sir. It's a Dutch-flagged ship, which reminds me here is what I would recommend. Do you know the Dutch Minister of Magic? Yes, Minister, Neil Schumann. I've worked with her before. Good. Tell her that we're going to need to have the Dutch Ministry of Magic take control of the operation. We've caught a break in that the boat will be traveling between 2 Dutch Antilles islands the night of the full moon. Since the boat itself is also Dutch, this means that we've avoided some jurisdictional issues as to who oversees the operation. I'd send everyone to either Aruba or Curacao and have them fly on over and grab Cooper before he transforms. How long do you think it will take them to get that done? Dionysus thought a minute. 2 or 3 days. 1 to convince the Dutch to take over, and 1 or 2 for the Dutch to organize a rescue party and send everyone over to Curacao. Thank God they can apparate from Holland to the Dutch Antilles. Scrimgeour gritted his teeth. Can you make it 2 and not 3? Dionysus frowned. I can't make any promises, but I'll do my best. However, I promise you this. If we don't make it in time, the captain is not going to be allowed to dock that boat in Willemstad until all of the werewolves have been taken off and transported to their respective ministries of magic. No one is getting off that boat. Slytherin Carmen Rumhagwart's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry England. Mr. Malfoy. Draco Malfoy, finally free of the talkative Crabbe and Goyle, looked up from his owl study guide and saw three people standing in front of him. One was Snape, the somewhat mentor and traitor. Next to him was Minerva McGonagall, the headmistress. Standing next to Headmistress McGonagall was a goblin. Draco, who didn't like goblins, frowned. What was a goblin doing at Hogwarts? McGonagall answered his unspoken question. Mr. Malfoy, Griffook here has some information which will likely please you a great deal. Draco looked at the goblin suspiciously. Really, what is that? In response, the goblin reached into his robe and extracted a key to a Hogwarts vault. You are Draco Malfoy, young man. Draco nodded. I am, Goblin. The goblin glowered at the mild insult, but resumed speaking. Good. I have come to inform you that you have inherited the contents of Bellatrix's Lestrange vault at Gringotts. Rodolphus and Bellatrix Lestrange are both dead, and according to Rodolphus Lestrange's will you, Bellatrix's nephew, are the designated next of kin. Here is the key, Mr. Malfoy. I apologize for the interruption and for bringing up bad memories. My condolences. Draco nodded. It's not like he spent that much time with the Lestranges. Thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Malfoy. Normally, as you are a minor, your father would gain custody of the vault and therefore the key. Unfortunately, he is missing and your mother is dead, so we have no choice in this case. Draco looked at the key quizzically and put it in his pocket. What's in there? The goblin shook his head. I have never been in there, Mr. Malfoy. If you wish, you can always go in and look for yourself. And with that, the goblin turned on his heel and left the room, Snape and McGonagall following closely behind. Chapter 196, Pet Shop Boys. Thursday, May 30, 1996, 2 days to full moon 0705 Rogers Reptile Houseleads England Horcruxes left. 2. Snake, Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 4 asterisk warning. Major character death. The car horn honked just in time for Igor Karkaroff and Sirius Black to jump out of the way. That would have been an awful way for 2 Order of the Phoenix members to meet their demise. Run over by a Toyota Camry while they were just about to destroy a Horcrux. They had known to apparate to a location maybe 10 feet in front of the entrance. What they had forgotten is that 10 feet from the entrance placed them in the middle of a busy street. Karkaroff nodded, and the 2 of them hustled over to the sidewalk and stood within sight of the entrance. There didn't appear to be anyone else in the area, which caused Karkaroff to breathe a sigh of relief. The only people who would be so adamant to hurry to a pet store first thing on a Thursday morning would be Death Eaters trying to retrieve Nagini before the Order of the Phoenix could get its hands on her. Although Voldemort almost certainly did not realize that the Order knew that Nagini was a Horcrux, the snake would be a tempting and easy target for any Order members in the area. Karkaroff muttered in Sirius's ear, "You've got the sword right." Sirius opened his robe slightly and revealed the sword of Gryffindor hanging in a scabbard from his belt. "Right here, Igor." "Good. Stay outside here with the sword. We don't want that robe flipping open in there and scaring the proprietor. If I need help, I'll shoot some sparks out the door. If that happens, drop the sword in the bushes over here and come on in with your wand out." Sirius grunted. And what happens if this Death Eater has backup hiding somewhere whose intention is to steal the sword so we can't destroy any more Horcruxes? Karkaroff hissed, "Okay, come in with the sword, but be careful. Now just wait out here and, well, act casual." Sirius nodded and began milling around outside. Taking a deep breath, Karkaroff headed over to the door and opened it. The front room was filled with all sorts of exotic pets. He saw a few ferrets, dagoos, and odd-furred beasts he'd never seen before. He half expected to run across a few acromantulas. There was a cash register near the entrance, currently unmanned. At the back of the room, there was a small opening leading to a second room. This back room had most of the reptiles. He saw a few snakes and a bird. He saw a bell for service and rang it. A couple of the birds squawked, and the proprietor emerged from the back room and shook his hand. "Welcome to Roger's reptile house, sir. How can I help you?" Karkaroff smiled. "I'm a bit of a connoisseur on large snakes. I've got a few of them at home, and was wondering if I could look at the 12-foot viper you mentioned in your television advertisement." The owner chuckled. "Ha, two of you in 5 minutes. I never thought she'd be that popular." Karkaroff didn't like the sound of this. Cautiously, "Someone else is interested in that particular specimen." "Yes, sir. He hasn't bought her yet, but he's seriously thinking about it and will likely close the deal as soon as I get back from talking with you. He's here right now. Maybe you two can reach an agreement as to who gets her. Rest assured, however, we've got several other large snakes in case the first customer takes her. Which reminds me, since he came in first, he gets first dibs on her. I hope you understand." Karkaroff nodded. "I understand, so let's take a look." The owner smiled and told Karkaroff to follow him. The former Death Eater was heading into the back of the store with the owner when the owner said, "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Pettigrew, but this man also wants to take a look at the snake." Those were the last words the proprietor would say for a while, as he was absolutely dumbfounded by what happened next. Karkaroff suddenly froze in shock, as heard some rustling near the big cage in the back of the store, presumably Nagini's. Apparently the customer was turning around to see who the newcomer was. The rustling stopped abruptly just as the proprietor moved out of the way. For the first time, the two customers could see each other. Both men shouted simultaneously. Karkaroff's suspicion was right. It was Peter Pettigrew. The only reason Karkaroff was still alive is that Pettigrew was as surprised as Karkaroff was to see the other person there. Wormtail's jaw had dropped, but he was reaching into his pocket for his wand. Behind Wormtail sat Nagini in her cage. The snake was staring at him, hard. Her forked tongue was flicking out expectantly. Karkaroff recognized that sign and realized that Nagini had likely been ordered by Voldemort to kill him. He hoped Wormtail didn't have the wherewithal to break open the top of the cage, so the snake could escape and attack Karkaroff. The moment of stasis ended, and time restarted. Karkaroff shouted for the proprietor to get down and started flinging curses at Wormtail. The Death Eater blocked one of them and hid behind the glass box which held the 7-foot python. Karkaroff tried another spell and swore as it hit the cage. Part of the front panel shattered, and all three people ducked to avoid the flying fragments. Karkaroff dove behind a crate and shouted for Sirius at the top of his lungs. Nagini stared at Karkaroff and Wormtail. Both of her dreams had come true. Wormtail had arrived to rescue her, and her first act as a free snake would be to kill Karkaroff. Things couldn't have turned out any better. Now if Wormtail could just kill Karkaroff before Karkaroff completed his betrayal by killing both of them. Curses began flying as the proprietor ran out of the way. The front of Belle's cage shattered as both wizards ducked for cover. Belle looked at Karkaroff and asked her, what's going on here? Is this human trying to buy me?" Nagini screamed back, "Don't move. The human in the back, with hair on his chin furthest from me, is bad. You can leave the cage. Go kill him." Belle reared back. "Wait a minute. I can't eat him. He's too big." Nagini was about to respond as the front door slammed open and someone bellowed, "Karkaroff." Karkaroff shouted something inhuman and ducked as one of Wormtail's curses flew over his head. There was a squawk, and one of the big birds fell to the ground. The man from the front of the store yelled something at Wormtail and pointed angrily at the bird. Karkaroff fired at Wormtail and would have hit had Belle not jumped out of the cage and started chasing after the fallen bird. Wormtail had instinctively jumped back in surprise when he saw the snake coming, and that jump saved his life. Wormtail recovered quickly, however, and threw Belle at Karkaroff. Karkaroff shrieked as Belle started trying to explain to everyone that he didn't do anything and didn't like being thrown around. Nagini watched as Karkaroff leaped back out of the way of the flying snake, tripped over the corner of her cage, lost his balance, and then fell to the ground as his wand slipped out of his hand. Wormtail stood triumphantly over him and pointed his wand at him. That was when an Expelliarmus from the front room catapulted the wand out of Wormtail's hand. The expression on Wormtail's face turned to panic as he turned to face the front room. Nagini didn't like it. It was 2-on-1, and Wormtail had no wand. Wormtail did the only thing he could do. His form blurred for a moment. Nagini had the distinct impression that he was shrinking very rapidly. As he shrank, Nagini a glimpse of another person entering the room, Sirius Black, whose spell had torn through the space where Wormtail's head had been and crashed into the wall above her cage. Belle suddenly pounced on something. Probably the bird, she thought. She watched in satisfaction as both Sirius and Karkaroff's faces suddenly contorted with horror. A moment later, Sirius looked at the floor for a moment, spoke briefly, and made a gesture with his fingers which looked somewhat like a cross. What was that all about? There was a brief moment of silence, after which Karkaroff and Sirius began speaking with the man from the front of the store. The proprietor shook their hands after a few moments, opened the lid of the cage momentarily, blocking her access to Karkaroff, and injected her with some odd object which made her very sleepy. The last thing she saw was Belle waving a dead mouse at her and boasting, "I got a mouse! I got a mouse!" Oddly enough, the mouse had a paw which seemed to be made out of silver. Voldemort did not sound happy the fight was over. Promising to repay the shopkeeper for the death of the macaw, he paid for Nagini and brought the tranquilized snake outside in a box. Nodding at Sirius, they both grabbed a handle of the box and apparated to a safe location. Once they were convinced no one else was around, Sirius Black brought out the sword. The end came quickly for Nagini, humanely and painlessly in her sleep. Chapter 197. Diolanus outs Voldemort. Thursday, May 30, 1996, 2 days to full moon. Dutch Ministry of Magic Amsterdam Horcruxes left. 1. Cup. Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3, 2% chance of the end of civilization. Neil Schumann slammed her fist on the table and shook her head angrily. Brushing wild grey hair out of her face, she roared, "This is not time to argue, ladies and gentlemen. We have to get that werewolf off the Nordum." One of her advisors shook his head. "We can't take a British citizen off the boat, especially in international waters. Ask Scrimgeour to do it." Schumann glared at him. "He can't do it because the Nordum is a Dutch-flagged ship. He and I both spoke with Diolanus about it, and we basically agreed to take him off the boat and return him to England, where he can be treated for his lycanthropy." Another advisor gasped. "Scrimgeour has figured out a way to cure lycanthropy. Why haven't I heard about this?" "He hasn't found a cure, Benno, but he's working with Severus Snape in converting so it can be delivered in pill form. They're going to be giving him wolfsbane potion once a month for the rest of his life. Be grateful, people, that this man got infected after the statute of secrecy disappeared, and not before. Otherwise, we would have had a very big problem." The first advisor grunted. "I thought we already had a big problem on our hands, Schumann. Where the hell is Voldemort? I hope he's dead, to be honest. I can't believe Scrimgeour hasn't found him yet. Maybe Diolanus should get rid of him, just as Scrimgeour kicked out Fudge. He shouldn't trying to cure incurable diseases, while there are dark wizards out there with 10 Downing Street in their sights." Schumann put her head in her hands. "I doubt he's dead, Jan. We'd have probably heard about it if Voldemort had been killed. Besides, give Scrimgeour a break. Voldemort is arguably the most dangerous dark wizard in over 100 years, possibly ever. The fact that he now has free rein to go after the Muggles makes him even more dangerous. At any rate, back to the point. Who here knows how to take out werewolves?" No one raised their hand, and Schumann groaned. There was an embarrassed silence, followed by an irritated, "Neil, I'm not a care of magical creatures teacher. I'm not an animal trainer. I'm an aura. I go after dark wizards, and this victim is neither dark nor a wizard." It's not like we can just kill some innocent muggle because a werewolf bit him. Schumann didn't like his tone. This innocent muggle isn't going to be innocent for long if you don't get to him by the time the full moon rises over Curacao. Unless I hear otherwise, you're all personally going to get a chance to try out for care of magical creatures, unless you can find, brief, and deploy a bunch of people who know how to capture and quarantine werewolves within 24 hours. End of story. There was a brief pause again. Finally, someone raised his hand at the back of the room. Minister, I think I know someone who may be able to help. Schumann breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, Nicolas. You're going to get a promotion out of this if you pull this off. Now talk. Nicolas nodded. It would be an honor, madame. However, there's only one minor problem. Schumann gritted her teeth. Oh, what's that? Nicolas hesitated for a moment, and then winced. Last time I was on a boat with him, he spent all his time retching over the railing. Sole ancestral wizarding Shreinsial, the minister of magic, nearly choked on his dinner when the huge ball of light abruptly materialized in front of him. His wand was halfway to his hand when he realized that the ball of light was actually an image of a fish. It was Dionysus Patronus. His eyebrows shot up. Dionysus wanted to contact him directly, it seemed. The only thing he could imagine the Grand Mugwump talking to him about was the identity of the man running North Korea. And judging by the fact that Dionysus was sending a patronus instead of operating through a traditional courier, this information must be extremely important. The fish opened its mouth and spoke in Dionysus's voice. Minister Shin Hei Jai, good evening. I have some urgent information for you regarding your case. We on Atlantis deemed it important enough that I contact you directly instead of waiting for ducks and owls to make their way across the ocean. The minister saluted. We appreciate your help, sir. I take you have identified the owner of the wand being wielded by the North Korean leader. That is correct, Minister, and the world owes the South Korean intelligence service a great deal of gratitude for their sharp photography. You see, the wand in question was purchased over 50 years ago by a British Hogwarts student named Tom Marvolo Riddle. The minister's jaw dropped. But he's... Dionysus finished the sentence. Yes, Minister, Riddle is Voldemort. The Dark Lord, who had apparently gone missing in Britain, seems to have crept out of the country and taken over North Korea. For the first time in centuries, a dark wizard at that, is ruling a Muggle nation, and most of the citizens of that nation are willing to die for him. This is a devastating development, needless to say. I have just raised the alert level here on Atlantis to DEFCON 3. The minister stared at him. DEFCON 3. It hasn't been that high since the Cold War, when the Americans and Soviets had whole forests of nuclear weapons pointed at each other. The fish nodded approvingly. You know your history, Minister. Very good. Needless to say, someone's going to have to do something about this. We can't intervene directly yet, but several people down here are starting to think of contingency plans in case Voldemort gets out of control. Are you going to contact the Muggles at all? Dionysus shook his head. We can't contact the Muggle world until we hit DEFCON 2. God willing, that won't happen. But the statute of secrecy is gone. I agree, but the law is explicit. No contact with the general Muggle world until DEFCON 2, and no actual Muggle intervention until DEFCON 1. I'm sorry, Minister. The minister sat down for a moment and tried to think things over. Troubled, he looked north, where the deadliest wizard of the modern era could very well be gathering an army to conquer the planet. Finally, an idea came to him. I've got an idea. What happens if we expose him as Voldemort, the man who tried to take over England? Dionysus thought for a moment and replied, That would be very helpful. What were you thinking? The minister grinned and began explaining his plan to the Grand Mugwump M.S. Nordham. Harrison Cooper put his hand to his head. I've already taken 2 pills. They're not working, and the box says you shouldn't take more than 2. Courtney folded her hands across her chest. I think we should go home, or at least see a mainland doctor. We should get off at the next stop and check into the emergency room there. Harrison nodded. That might not be a bad idea. What happens if they keep us there overnight and we miss the boat? Courtney shook her head. We go back early. The honeymoon was good while it lasted. It wasn't our fault that you got sick. Harrison thought for a moment. Don't give up too quickly, Courtney. I suspect that they'll let us back on and give us some stronger medicine. Besides, it's got to be food allergies maybe combined with seasickness. It can't be anything contagious, because no one else on the boat is sick, especially you. But this boat is too big to induce seasickness. This is most unusual, Harrison. If they think you should go home or spend extended time in the hospital on the next island, we're following the doctor's orders. End of story. Forget the cruise. Harrison sighed and nodded. You may be right, Courtney. What's the next stop? Courtney looked at the schedule. The next stop is Aruba. We arrive Saturday morning. That's the day after tomorrow. Sunday is Curacao. Presidential Palace Pyongyang Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Dear leader, I have some important news for you. Voldemort turned to face the official in the audience chamber. Yes, what is it? The official responded by handing over a document. I am pleased to report that the leader of the South has agreed to hold a summit with you. He has agreed to your terms and wants to do it tomorrow. I'm sorry for the short notice, sir, but... Voldemort waved it away. Don't worry about it, my dear man. Tell the South that I am prepared to do anything necessary to diffuse this international tension. The official bowed and left. Voldemort nearly jumped with joy as he was about to take control of the South and put Lucius in command down there. His territory was about to double in size. Taking over his first country had been the hardest task so far. The second had been much easier, especially since he had the First Nations prestige to back him up. Things would likely get easier still from here on in. He was fairly convinced that he'd control most of the world by the time the year 2000 came around. All he needed to do was recruit more and more Death Eaters from Dilmy's old cell in India to serve as military governors. This would be fun. Chapter 198, Korean Summit. Friday, May 31, 297 AG after Gulliver, corresponding to AD 1996. 1 day to full Moonfun Island, Laputagaliver Consortium Pacific Ocean Horcruxes left. 1. Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3, the dreaded Lamel Gulliver had done it again. Lone Palt couldn't think of any explanation for all of the floods over the past few years. His great-grandfather had built this house on the beach at the south end of the island. His family had lived there for 50 years without incident. Then came the flood of 253. A tremendous storm had ripped through Fern Island. The Lapitans were accustomed to storms, of course. However, this one had brought both rain and wind and had occurred at an astronomically high tide. Most of the island had been inundated, and the sea level had risen to the point where his house had been filled with a foot of water. It had taken him weeks to clean everything out, even with magic. The high priest had told the people on the affected islands that this was a fluke occurrence and that it wouldn't happen again. He was correct in that nothing like it had been seen before on any of the Lapitan Islands. He was wrong, however, when he predicted that it wouldn't happen again. The next flood came in 272, almost 20 years later. Once again, Lone found himself cleaning out the ground floor. Once again, the high priest insisted that it wouldn't happen again. Yet it did, however. The floods came with increasing regularity. Once again in 284, once in 291, and once in 294. The high priest, finally convinced that something strange was going on, took a look around and made an astonishing observation. The sea level was rising, and judging from His Excellency's investigation, it was doing so faster and faster. What's more, no one in Laputa, or in the entire consortium for that matter, had done it. It was obviously Gulliver's fault. Apparently, the Dread Muggle had decided that unleashing terrible diseases on the consortium population back in the years 2 and 3 hadn't been bad enough. Lone glared at the ominous waves crashing on the other side of the breakwater. Gulliver could do what he wanted, he thought. However, the Muggle wasn't getting this house. Lone had grown up here and was fed up with these damn floods. He wasn't going anywhere. And thanks to his father-in-law, someone who had retired here from the American town of Prescott, he knew a spell which would keep the water away from his house. He set to work casting a spell surrounding the house. Checking to make sure that the defensive screen was working as designed, he went inside to wait out the storm. 5 hours later, the breakwater failed and the water plowed into Fern Island. The inundation was minor compared to those of 284 and 291. However, it was enough to wreak havoc along the South Beach. All of the houses on that side of the island were flooded, just as they had been before. All except one, that is Korean Summit, Beijing, China. Voldemort, Lucius, and a few of the Indian Death Eaters popped into room the which served as the welcoming chamber for the North Korean diplomats. Cameras, both wizard and Muggle, took photographs as the North Korean delegation walked towards the room in which the talks were going to be held. The Chinese Minister of Magic shook his hand. "Good afternoon, Chang Sung-teek. I'm Li Wang, and I'm in charge of security here. Thank you for coming, sir. If there's anything we can do to help ease the tension between your two countries, just ask." Voldemort smiled for the cameras. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Wang, and I'll tell you if we need help. However, I think we've got everything under control and are fairly certain that there won't be any incidents. Besides, I highly doubt that the South will be stupid enough to trigger an incident so soon after Kim Jong-il's death." Wang bowed. "I hope you're right, sir. At any rate, the conference room is all set. It's been booked for 6 hours, an amount of time the South believes will be enough to get some tentative negotiations going. Is that all right with you, sir?" Voldemort nodded. "That will be fine, sir. In fact, I think that will more than enough for a first summit. It's not like we're going to be able to solve the entire Korean dispute with one meeting like this. I expect that there are going to be more of them. After all, I did suggest one summit per week." "Indeed you did, Mr. President. Now, if you wouldn't mind, we'll go through the security procedures. First, we're going to need to take your wands." Voldemort's eyes narrowed, and he stared at the Chinese security officer. "You can't take our wands, sir. We'll be defenseless against the Muggle soldiers I allowed the South to include in their delegation." Wang nodded. "I'm aware of that, Mr. President. Rest assured that we disarmed the South soldiers as soon as they arrived as well. You can see their guns right over there." He pointed, and Voldemort turned to see a stack of guns. As he watched, a South Korean soldier walked into the room, was intercepted by another security officer, and had his gun added to the pile. Voldemort nodded in understanding. If all else fails, he could just apparate away and rely on Choi Yun's wand, which he had left at home. "All right, you've convinced us." Reluctantly, Voldemort surrendered his wand and ordered Lucius and the rest of his party to do the same. "All right, we've given you our wands. Now what?" The soldier came closer and held his hands out. "We'll need to search your bags. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we believe that such an action will be necessary to prevent suicide bombings and the like. Gentlemen, this should only take a minute." A little worried, but forced to play along due to the presence of the video cameras, Voldemort and the rest of the Death Eaters handed over their bag. Most of his party had brought their own food because they were afraid of poison. The security agent appeared to understand their predicament and left the food alone. However, his eyes perked up when he came to the vial containing Voldemort's polyjuice potion. Wang frowned and pointed at the vial. "Mr. President, what's this?" Voldemort shrugged. "A medication I'll need to take from time to time. Why do you ask?" The security agent looked thoughtfully at the vial. The rules are that no liquids may be brought into the conference room because they could be used as possible explosives. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm afraid we'll have to confiscate this. Voldemort's eyes widened in alarm as another of the people searching their bags found Lucius's polyjuice potion container. He reached for his wand to try to imperious the man, only to find that the guard had already taken his wand. This could be trouble, he thought. He needed to improvise. I'd be willing to let you, a neutral party, investigate the vial and check it for explosives. I need that in the room, I'm afraid. You don't want me falling over dead in a room full of South Koreans. The security agent thought for a moment. That's a fair request. Please excuse us for a few minutes while we take these vials to be analyzed. And before Voldemort could say anything, the man pocketed the 2 vials and left the room. There seemed something strange about this man. Wang had an odd accent which Voldemort couldn't place. He was definitely Chinese, that was obvious. However, none of the Chinese he had spoken with after his succession to the presidency had spoken with this accent. Suddenly, it came to him. There were 2 types of Chinese, Mandarin and Cantonese. This man must be speaking with the other accent. He really hoped that the agent would return the polyjuice potion soon. He'd need to take it again pretty soon. A few minutes went by, and the agent returned with the vials. As far as he could tell, they were undamaged. Your medicine has been cleared, Mr. President. We apologize for the inconvenience. Voldemort accepted his vial and gave the other back to Lucius. Not at all, Mr. Wang. I can understand the need for security. Wang was about to reply when his Muggle communicator beeped. The guard spoke into it for a while and nodded. Finally, he looked back at Voldemort. The South's delegation is all set. Wait here, please. You'll be able to enter the room in a few minutes. There's protocol to be followed here, you understand. Both of you have to enter at the same time, and the moderator has to come in before you, and so forth. Got it. Voldemort smiled. I understand, Mr. Wang. I've seen this before. The meeting droned on and on. Whenever people brought up important issues, people tended to either table it or try to think of reasons why it wasn't a problem. No wonder the 2 countries had been in a state of war since 1950. Well, a polyjuice break would help alleviate the tedium. Excusing himself, he reached into his pocket for the vial and headed outside to the bathroom so he could drink his medicine. The cameras followed him over to the bathroom, and he pointedly ignored them. He opened the door to the bathroom and was relieved to find that the reporters were discreetly staying out. Closing the door behind him, he walked to the sink and brought out the vial. He lifted it to his mouth and tilted it towards his lips. He had gotten out just in time. He had maybe 2 minutes left before he'd have changed back to himself. One more application should keep him going for another hour. Nothing came out. The vial was empty. Voldemort's jaw dropped. What the hell had happened? He'd filled the vial with enough dosages to last him 24 hours, and there was no way the Muggles would have been able to realize that it was polyjuice potion and not some kind of medicine. Besides, the vial was still sealed. Suddenly, he froze. The South had cheated. They brought a wizard along to create a duplicate vial which looked like it had the polyjuice potion in it. The Chinese man, obviously a South Korean polyjuiced as someone Chinese, and therefore speaking with an accent, had swapped vials with him. No wonder they had been so willing to set up a meeting. He had to get out of there in a hurry. No, scratch that. Lucius would probably get worried and investigate, and presumably they'd grab him as well when he changed back to his normal form. Once they realized who Lucius was, they'd figure out who their dear leader was pretty quickly. His body suddenly screamed in pain as it began to distort back into his true self. He bent over the toilet in agony as the reporters began calling for President Chang from outside the bathroom. 30 seconds later, the door crashed open, and the reporters raced into the bathroom accompanied by a doctor and a security guard. They stood frozen in shock when they saw a serpentine-looking man staring back at them, the empty vial in his hand. Voldemort swore fervently. He had a problem. It was time to go back to North Korea, re-emerge as Chang Sung-teek, and try to convince the world that a British dark wizard named Voldemort had tried to disrupt the meeting in order to seed chaos throughout the world. This wizard had ensorcelled the dear leader and taken his place at the meeting. It was up to Chang Sung-teek to remedy this situation. One of the best ways to punish this capitalist nation would be to invade the South. One of the guards shouted, drew his gun, and fired. The bullet went through the empty space where Voldemort had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. The man who had fired the shot ran into the conference room screaming, "President Chang is an imposter. He's some guy who looks like a snake. The TV cameras are all over him," and he was interrupted by a huge flash as the entire North Korean delegation apparated out of there. Chapter 199. That maniac is in charge of a country. Friday, May 31, 1996. One day to full moon. Dutch Ministry of Magic Amsterdam Horcruxes left. 1. Cup. Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3 Jorrit Husing looked around the room at the rest of the werewolf hunters. They were all set and ready to go. All they had to do now was deploy to Curacao with their brooms, get final instructions in the courtyard of the synagogue, and take to the skies when the Dutch satellites had located the boat. Husing's team was loaded for bear. All of them were carrying wands, of course. However, several of them had brought Muggle devices which would dispense animal tranquilizer. Since this operation was going to be taking place within sight of Muggles, it wouldn't be particularly diplomatic to be seen attacking a Muggle whose sole crime was that he had been bitten by a werewolf. From what Derek Michelson, Harrison Cooper's boss, had told Rufus Scrimgeour about the man, Cooper was a decent, hard-working person. He had just turned 31, and his wife was expecting. He wouldn't hurt a fly, according to his manager. The fact that his wife was expecting worried many of the people on his team. No one really knew what would happen if a pregnant woman was bitten by a werewolf. What would happen when she transformed? Would she lose the baby? Would the baby also become a werewolf? There was very little information on the subject, and Husing hoped that Courtney Cooper, age 29, wouldn't be the first person to find out what would happen. Furthermore, would a Muggle react to werewolf poison in the same way a wizard would? Nicholas couldn't rule out the possibility that the Muggle wouldn't change at all. Still, it was better to be safe than sorry. A few auras were going to be coming along as well. Since the initial terror attack had been intended to start a werewolf pandemic, Minister Schumann couldn't rule out the possibility that Death Eaters were hiding on the boat and would be willing to hex the Dutch team to ensure that more people were bitten by the creature. With all of Lupin's victims either dead or captured, with the exception of Cooper, all of the people hoping for a successful pandemic would have their eyes squarely on the Nordum. The plan was to fly over to Harrison Cooper's stateroom, which thankfully had a balcony they could land on in privacy, and simply take the man before he transformed. His wife would come as well, though she would be brought aside while he was transformed and informed of the situation. Once Harrison had reverted back to human form, he would be fitted with an ankle bracelet and returned to the ship. Normally, apparition between countries was forbidden. However, Curacao used to be a Dutch colonial possession and still had close ties with the Netherlands. True to bureaucratic form, the Ministry of Magic had never gotten around to preventing apparition between the Netherlands and the Dutch Antilles. It would take a good 20 minutes to make it all the way across the Atlantic, but 20 minutes was a lot faster than the hours or days it would take using other forms of transportation. Time would be of the essence in this operation, as the moon would wait for no one. 5 minutes before they were about to leave, he heard a commotion in the hallway. People were arguing vehemently and pointing at the werewolf capture team. He heard the name Voldemort mentioned. Husing frowned. Had Voldemort been hiding out on the cruise ship? If so, his team was in big trouble. He doubted if any of them were strong enough to take out Voldemort. The time for departure came and went, and they didn't get the official authorization. This was disturbing, he thought. Something had come up, presumably involving Voldemort, which may have been given higher priority than the capture of the werewolf. He had a harrowing vision of the operation being delayed a couple of days, and then reorganized with a whole armada of people to take every single person off the boat. He'd probably have to be taken off as well, because he'd be throwing up over the railing the whole time if things really went south. Eventually, Minister Schumann came down herself to speak with him. Her face was grim. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take your auras. We have just received word that Voldemort has returned and is in charge of North Korea, with Lucius Malfoy as his Minister of Magic. The man you know as Chang Sung-teek is in fact Voldemort under the Polyjuice potion. The real Chang Sung-teek is missing and is presumed dead. Atlantis is at DEFCON 3. Husing swore, "Jesus Christ, that maniac is in charge of a country." "I'm afraid so, Jorit. That's going to make things very problematic. The people like him and see him as a hero, and any attempt to kill him will almost certainly restart the Korean War simply out of popular revenge. Once the war restarts, both sides will start calling on alliances, which will almost surely bring the Americans, Russians, and Chinese into the mix." One of the other werewolf hunters whistled. "Good God, you're talking World War Roman III. Schumann nodded. "That's quite possible, and rest assured that we're doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. Voldemort, of course, is denying everything and claiming that the Voldemort who popped up during the Korean summit was in fact someone masquerading as him. He, as Chang Sung-teek, had been ensorcelled and polyjuiced. Most of the North Koreans are believing him. At any rate, our next task is to convince the North Koreans that Voldemort was running their country all along. We have evidence to back that up, as the South has pictures of the North's leader wielding Voldemort's wand shortly after he was inaugurated. I hope the North Korean population will accept our claim, though." Husing nodded. "God help us all. I can see why you want the auras. Go ahead, take them. We'll do what we can without them, and if all else fails, we'll kill the werewolf and anyone he bites." The minister nodded, looked at the auras, and told them to follow her. 5 minutes after that, she gave the signal, and a boarding party half the size it had been half an hour ago turned on the spot and started heading towards Curacao. Chang Sung-teek had just finished his speech explaining that he had been ensorcelled by Voldemort and been prevented from going to the meeting with the South. It was obvious that Voldemort and the British were in league with the South, and that the capitalists had no intention of ever making peace with the North. He had warned the people of North Korea that a resumption of hostilities may be on the horizon and that everyone should be prepared. The people had reacted about the way he had expected them to. They accepted everything he said. He silently thanked Kim Jong-il for his propaganda infrastructure and said they'd sacrifice everything to punish the South. He doubted that most of them were in any condition to actually fight in the army, but it was something to keep in mind. He was fairly happy with the outcome. However, there was something which troubled him which had nothing to do with North Korea. He toyed with Choi Yoon's wand as he paced the president's office. All of his Death Eaters had been rearmed with wands taken from the South Korean wizards, who had overthrown Kim Jong-il in the first place. Nagini was dead. Normally, he could have always gotten another familiar. However, Nagini had been a Horcrux. That was at least 2 Horcruxes down, the diary and the snake. Draco had also reported that he had seen Dumbledore poring over a picture of a ring, with the Deathly Hallows symbols engraved on its gem. Could Dumbledore have found out about his Horcruxes? The fact that the snake had been destroyed at about the time Dumbledore had been researching the ring was disturbing. He didn't know how the Order had found out, but it was a distinct possibility. Voldemort knew not to underestimate Dumbledore. He resolved to send Death Eaters from Dilmy's cell, along with any volunteering North Korean wizards, to check on the Horcruxes. He and Lucius were too busy in North Korea to handle this themselves at the moment, and Wormtail, his next choice, had been killed in the attack which had taken out Nagini. He reached into the pocket of his robe and withdrew the message Draco Malfoy had sent him, which informed him that Draco had inherited the contents of Bellatrix's vault. This was a very fortunate turn of events, he thought. The fact that Draco now had the key to the vault would come in quite handy here. He wondered what he'd do if he found proof his Horcruxes were being threatened. He'd have to do something about it, of course, and he'd probably need to find himself a backup plan if his paranoia were justified. Chapter 200, Death to Voldemort. Saturday, June 1, 1996. Full Moon British Secret Service Headquarters location, classified Great Britain Horcruxes left. 1. Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3 Sirius Black stood at attention with over 200 witches, wizards, and muggles. The people in the room were among the best of the best. High-ranking Master Auras, British Secret Service agents like himself, American Delta Force commandos, and even a few elite Mossad men who had been called away from the deteriorating situation in the Middle East. He could tell that this was going to be one of the most powerful magical armies ever sent to the field, and it was without question the first one, which included Muggle soldiers in its midst. There were rumors circulating that similar gatherings were taking place in locations all over the world. Supposedly, over 2,000 wizards were going to be involved, and a good 100,000 Muggles. Within a matter of weeks, all these soldiers would be converging on North Korea. If everything went as planned, the Dark Lord would be eliminated once and for all, and everything would return to normal. For the first time in history, technology and magic would join forces. Fighter jets would be flying in information with dragons soaring. Helicopters would be flying in formation with dragons, as the dragons wouldn't be able to fly fast enough. Guns would be fired along with curses, and bombs would be dropped along with acromantulas and other nasty creatures. Rufus Scrimgeour, in full dress robes, stood at the front of the room. His hands were clenched, and he was shouting at the top of his lungs. Ladies and gentlemen, brave men and women of our glorious coalition, listen to me. You have been given the honor to rid the world of a man who is, quite possibly, the most dangerous human being ever to walk the face of the earth. He was killed once by a 1-year-old boy, yet he still managed to return. He was hit with a half-ton bomb in an explosion which destroyed most of a cemetery, yet he still persevered. We have learned from our mistakes, fellow soldiers. This time, when we kill him, he will be gone for good. Sirius and the crowd cheered heartily. The sound was absolutely deafening. You will be transported to your staging area in a matter of hours. Since Atlantis is at DEFCON 3, apparition is still not permitted between countries. Hence, you will be forced to use portkeys. Each team will be sharing one portkey so we can ensure that you won't be separated. Once you are there, you will have to be able to deploy at a moment's notice. We apologize for the hurry-up-and-wait timing here, but we are awaiting one final signal before we can start the operation. Rest assured that I will personally be delivering that signal once we hear final word from an operation we are planning, which will involve the stores in Diagon Alley and Gringotts Bank. Sirius was one of the few people who realized what this was. The Order had informed him that Nagini had been destroyed and that there was only one Horcrux left, the Hufflepuff Cup, in the late Bellatrix Lestrange's vault in Gringotts. Until the last Horcrux was destroyed, Voldemort was still immortal, and an attack would be relatively pointless. Keep your wands at the ready and weapons armed, for when that word comes our crusade will begin. Fight for freedom and fight for the Muggles. Fight for the wizards with Muggle parents, who will no longer have to worry about Death Eater persecution. Fight for the poor souls of North Korea, who do not realize that they are being led by a tyrant. And fight for the world as a whole, as we can only hope that this confrontation does not trigger the Third World War. Scrimgeour lifted his hands to the air and shouted, "And so let us raise our hands in self-confidence and justice and shout the chant one more time, Death to Voldemort." The crowd immediately took up the chant, Death to Voldemort, Death to Voldemort, Death to Voldemort. Sirius looked around the room in approval. If this wouldn't work, nothing would. It was the world's last and best chance. Horcrux cave Great Britain, casting a spell to heal the cut on his arm. The Death Eater summoned the boat and sailed off into the underground lake. He watched the Inferi floating beneath him and was wondering if Voldemort would summon them in case he needed to take over a country. Although Voldemort had told him that Inferi wouldn't attack Death Eaters, the Indian was still a bit leery of meeting one of them in a dark alley. The prow of the boat bumped into shore of the small island at the center of the lake. The Death Eater got out, tied the boat down, and hurried to the pedestal at the center of the island. The pedestal was filled with a bright green liquid which he wouldn't have wanted to drink on a bet. Pointing his wand at the liquid, he carefully repeated the words Voldemort had told him to say. The green liquid shimmered for a moment and became transparent. The Death Eater could now see that there was a locket hiding in the liquid. This locket had been invisible as long as the liquid had been opaque. The Death Eater had no idea what the locket did. However, he didn't need to know. All Voldemort had asked him to do was to check if it was there. And there it was, just as Voldemort had hoped. Mission accomplished, he headed back to the boat and began the trip back to the Surface Presidential Palace, North Korea. The reporter fidgeted uneasily as she spoke to Voldemort. I agree that they're being paranoid, dear leader. However, they are absolutely convinced that you are Voldemort and that you've been polyjuicing as Chang Sungtik, not the other way around. We need proof that you're not. Voldemort smiled and handed out Choi Yun's wand. And they shall have it. I believe their claim is based on the observation that was holding Lord Voldemort's wand when I was inaugurated. The reporter nodded. That's right, Your Excellency. That's what I thought. Well, here's your proof. Take my wand. No, don't touch it, as wands and muggles don't mix. Drop it in your purse and give it to the British. I suspect that the British will check my wand against Voldemort's and see if they're the same wand. They will find that they're not, and that will exonerate me. The reporter opened her purse, and Voldemort dropped the wand into it. He had more wands where that came from, and if all else failed, he could always borrow Lucius's. The reporter closed the purse and bowed. Thank you, Your Excellency. I hope, for the sake of us all, that this is enough to stop their investigation. Voldemort pursed his lips. So do I, madame, so do I. Main Hospitaler and Gestad Aruba, the doctor put down his stethoscope. I can't make heads or tails of it, Mr. Cooper. I apologize. Harrison stared at the doctor and then at his wife. You must have some idea. The doctor shrugged. I'm sorry, but the only thing I can think of is that you've started getting migraines. I can't see how migraines would start popping up while you were on a vacation, since those are usually caused by stress. But that's the only thing which even remotely fits the symptoms. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. That would definitely explain the headaches and the nausea, and even the overreaction to bright lights like that of the moon. What do you propose? The doctor reached for a pad of paper, wrote out a prescription, and handed it to Harrison. Here, this is a relatively powerful medicine designed to deal with migraines. I suspect that this will work. If it doesn't work within 48 hours, get off at the next island and fly back to England. In the meantime, I don't see why you can't continue on your cruise. Harrison pocketed the prescription and shook the doctor's hand. Thank you so much, doctor. I hope this will work. Now, if you will excuse us, we have to get back to the boat in a hurry. It's getting late, and we have to head off to Curacao. It took half an hour to fill the prescription. Harrison and Courtney managed to make it up the gangplank onto the boat just in time for its departure. Harrison smiled. Next stop, Curacao, and a big surprise for his wife when the full moon came out. Ministry of Magic Amsterdam. Nicholas stared at the report and jumped to his feet. He spun and raced into a meeting between the Minister of Magic and Rufus Scrimgeour. The two politicians turned to him in irritation. Nicholas, this is a private meeting. You can't come in here. What's so important that you interrupt us? Nicholas' response was spoken so quickly it was almost incomprehensible. Ministers, we've just gotten a report from a hospital in Oranjestad. Harrison Cooper just checked himself in for an appointment. The two ministers stared at each other and then at Nicholas. When they spoke in unison. Get him, main Hospitaler and Justad Aruba. The receptionist shook her head and looked through the paperwork surrounding the day's patients. Yes, he visited us earlier today. However, I don't see any indication that he has been admitted for an overnight stay. I suspect that our staff treated him and let him go. Jan roared so loudly the woman nearly backed into the wall. You let him go. Where is he? The receptionist winced. I don't know, sir. I'm sorry. He could be anywhere on the island by now. For all we know, he left on one of the cruise ships, West Bank. Eliza Ben Dor was thankful that he was able to participate on this mission, even though they had been forced to amputate his arm. He only needed one hand, however, to steer the tank. Grimly, he stared at the hill upon the horizon. Had he seen a metallic flash out there? Yes, he had. That's where the Hamas shells had been coming from. The tank rumbled forward into the sunset. Glancing behind him to ensure that the other tank was there, he noticed that the full moon was rising. This close to the horizon, it looked huge and had the color of blood. Elisa hoped that it wasn't a bad omen. Chapter 201, Good Werewolf. Saturday, June 1, 1996. Full moon 45 minutes before moonrise lycanthrope transformation, Centerland and Great Britain Horcruxes left. 1. Cup. Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3. Lauren Mistry was scared, and judging from all of the women around her, she wasn't the only one. The ankle bracelet had teleported her from her home to the Ministries of Magic's facility a little over an hour ago. She had immediately been given a dosage of wolfsbane potion. No experimenting with pills here now, that the transformation was almost upon her, and ordered to strip. Once she had undressed, she had been ushered into a room where several women explained to her what was going to happen. The transformation would occur as soon as the moonlight hit the bite victim. It would be extremely painful, and the wizards had provided the victims with Tylenol and other Muggle medications to ensure that the Muggles suffer as little as possible. Once the transformation was complete, each victim would find herself in the shape of a dog whose fur color would match her natural hair color. The dog would look much like the creature which had attacked them at the stadium, with the sole exception being that the animal would be female. The wizards emphasized that the victims were not at risk of harming themselves or others because the potion would allow them to keep their minds during the transformation. The staff recommended that the victims should go to their specially prepared cells and take a nap. The doors to the cells would be locked and barred to ensure that no one escaped, and the cells would have padded walls and carpeted floors to ensure that victims would not hurt themselves if they started flailing around while they were transformed. Although the subjects would still be able to hear and understand human speech, they would not be capable of speech themselves, because dogs simply didn't have the vocal capabilities of humans. If they needed to communicate at all with the staff, they would have to do so by barking in Morse code. Each cell had a poster with the Morse code key mounted on the ceiling, where the werewolves would not be able to tear it down or damage it. Usually, victims would be given the option of being sealed in a windowless room for the entire night in order to avoid transformation for a month. However, the staff argued that the victims needed to experience the transformation at least once just to ensure that they understood what it was like. There were surprisingly few questions after the presentation, and Lauren suspected that everyone was too frightened to ask anything. One woman complained that she had been yanked from her car in the middle of the highway, and her unmanned car had almost certainly crashed into the guardrail. The wizards had winced when they had heard that, and spent a few minutes reconfiguring the bracelets to send all of the bite victims, the women at least, back to their homes instead of their departure points. Seeing that everyone's questions had been answered, the patients were led into their cells and locked inside. Each one was maybe 15 x 15 feet. There was a bed which would be able to serve both humans and dogs. There was a large container of water and an open refrigerator with raw meat in it. The idea of eating raw meat still churned her stomach a little, but she was slowly getting accustomed to it. There were also several kegs filled with water and a few man-sized dog toys, presumably intended for Great Danes or other large canines. The lights were dim, but she could barely make out the Morse code chart on the ceiling. She looked out the window and drew a deep breath as the southeastern horizon slowly began to brighten. Several of the women in the cells near her suddenly began praying, and a couple of others began crying. She couldn't figure out whether she should do one of them or both. Then the moon peeked over the horizon, and virtually everyone screamed at once. She doubled over in pain as soon as the moonlight her. Virtually every nerve in her body started screaming at her, and she soon found herself down on all fours. She felt her head and ears elongating, and her paws started shaking uncontrollably. She blinked as she realized what she had just thought. Paws. Sure enough, she looked down at where her hands had been. She had paws. The room seemed brighter, and she could see the Morse code chart clearly on the ceiling. The transformation completed, and the pain stopped. The room looked entirely different from the perspective of a dog. It dawned on her that she might be able to take care of her own dogs well, the real dogs, more easily after going through this ordeal. She heard frantic barking next door. Trying to remember the sequence of barks, she glanced up at the Morse code chart. My husband is going to kill me. Oh, and I have to pee. Meanwhile, the woman on the other side started complaining about, well, feminine stuff, which didn't seem to work well in a wolf's body. Had Lauren still been human, she would have been quite embarrassed. If she had blushed, however, it would never have been visible through her fur. She remembered the staff member's advice. Wondering how she'd be able to describe this experience to her husband, she curled up in a ball and went to sleep ms Nordenbetween Aruba and Curacao 45 minutes before moonrise. The first officer of the cruise ship was jolted back to full awareness when the phone suddenly began ringing on the bridge. The captain grunted, dropped his playing cards. The ship ran on automatic pilot most of the time, and went to answer it. The first officer stared at the captain, confused. They weren't expecting any calls, and the last check of the ship's systems before leaving Aruba had not uncovered any problems. The captain lifted the handset. Captain Devry speaking. Who's this? A few seconds went by, and the man's eyebrows nearly reached his hairline. He drew a deep breath and said, Your Majesty, this is an unexpected pleasure. How can I help you? The first officer dropped his own cards and mouthed two words at the captain. The Queen. The captain, whose eyes had gone wild, nodded. Turning back to the handset, he said, Minister of Magic Schumann. Yes, I'll hold. Yes, Madame Minister, he's on board. I'll check that out right now. The captain put his hand over the receiver. Bernhard, check the passenger listing. Find Harrison Cooper's stateroom. The first officer gaped at him. Michael, what the? The captain gestured wildly at him to do it, and he complied. The first officer looked through the databases and nodded. Yup, I've found him. His room's on deck 5 on a port-side balcony. Why do you ask? The captain had held up a hand and relayed the information to the Minister of Magic. Suddenly, the man's face went white. He's a what? This has got to be a joke. He's going to bite more people. There are wizards en route. God almighty. I'll see what I can do. Yes, madame. I hope so too, Minister. I'll be praying as well, Your Majesty. Devry's out. Visibly shaking, the captain hung up the phone. The first officer stared at him in confusion. Michael, what the hell happened? Did this Cooper person bring a rabid dog on board? I didn't think people were allowed to bring animals on board. What does the Ministry of Magic? The captain shook his head to clear it. We can discuss this later, Bernhard. Trust me, you don't want to know. First things first, we've got a problem on our hands. How long is it to moonrise? The first officer stared at him. Sir. Answer the question. The first officer looked at his watch and at one of the charts. 38 minutes and counting. Why? The captain cut him off. Where's Harrison Cooper's cabin? The first officer pointed it out. Over here, Sir Port sighed. It's facing south right now. The captain muttered something under his breath which sounded like, "Oh, wonderful, it's going to be illuminated by the moonlight." The first officer couldn't make sense of this. However, the captain's next order made even less sense. The captain headed to the control panel. Turn the ship about 180 degrees so the starboard side is facing the moon. Travel in reverse for a while. Whatever you do, do not allow the port side of the ship to see moonlight. If anyone asks, tell them we're testing a new propulsion system. The first officer stood up. Michael, are you out of your mind? What in God's name is going on here? The captain shook his head. You don't want to know, trust me. I don't believe it myself, but I don't understand magic. Now turn the boat around. That's an order. The first officer, very confused, carried out the order. It would take a good 10 minutes to turn the ship around, and a good 10 more to get the ship into full reverse. He watched as the shadows began to move around the cabin. The captain nodded in approval. Good. Now tell everyone in the medical section to get as much animal tranquilizer or equivalent as they can get their hands on and bring it up here as soon as possible. Arm yourself, but only use rubber bullets. Once we're all set, we're going down to his cabin on a very unusual mission. Once we get there, make sure no one else enters or leaves that area without our knowledge. The first officer couldn't believe it. Someone let a rabid animal on board and were going to tranquilize it. I don't see how that's even possible. We would have noticed such a creature when it entered the boat. The captain thought for a moment and then nodded. That's not entirely right, but it's close enough for government work. Now let's get this over with, and whatever you do, don't tell any of the passengers as we don't want them to panic. With that, the captain raced out of the bridge, the first officer in his wake. The first officer found it odd that the captain hadn't asked the hospital wing for a large supply of rabies shots, but he assumed that Michael knew what he was doing. Chapter 202, Bad Werewolf. Saturday, June 1, 1996. Full moon 5 hours before Moonrisum/S Nordum between Aruba and Curacao Horcruxes left. 1. Cup Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3 Harrison Cooper looked around the cocktail lounge on the top deck of the ship. Everything seemed to be perfect for his wife's surprise. The singer had agreed to perform the song Harrison had written for her, and the catering staff was going to provide her with a huge cake for her birthday. You didn't turn 30 twice. After all, 2 hours before Moonrise congregation, Mikv, Israel Emanuel Willemstad Curacao. The open-air courtyard outside the synagogue was full of people for the second time today. 4 hours earlier, it had been thronged with worshippers who had just gotten out of Sabbath services. Now, however, it was filled with people their tradition's holy book had warned them against under certain circumstances. The fact that the courtyard was surrounded by walls meant that it was a perfect place for the wizards to gather. The lack of a ceiling and the fact that the complex was closed to tourists on the Sabbath made it better still. Tourists milled around outside, completely oblivious, as Jan and the rest of the wizards who had visited the hospital in Aruba rematerialized in the courtyard with a flash of apparition. Jarrett Husing didn't like the look on their faces as they walked over to issue their report. Jan threw his hands up in air in irritation. They had him in the hospital, all right, but they discharged him before we got there. He'd been complaining about headaches and nausea, apparently. Husing swore. Lycanthropy symptoms. Shit. It sounds like Muggles aren't immune to the disease. That's my conclusion as well, Jarrett. At any rate, we spent some time looking around the island and talking with the authorities, but there weren't any leads. That was a long shot, however, as it was almost certain that if he wasn't in the hospital, he had gotten back on the boat. Husing nodded. I figured as much, so we've confirmed that he's still on the boat. I haven't seen him, Jarrett, but that's the only possibility I can think of. I doubt he'd want to miss the rest of the cruise because he was sick. Husing grimaced. Well, it was a try. All right, we're all here. Let's get on with this. He raised his voice. Everyone, gather around. I've got some final instructions here, and you're going to want to listen to them. 90 minutes before Moonrisiest to Willemstad, Joyce de Ward blinked in confusion as she saw a long procession of specks flying over the Tafelberg. They seemed to be heading due east, away from Willemstad. They looked like birds, but they were way too big to be birds. An odd thought came to her. Could they be? She shook her head to clear it. Nah, they probably weren't wizards. What would wizards be doing down here? Shrugging, she continued driving back towards her house 60 minutes before Moonrisum/S Nordum Lido deck. Harrison shrugged. It's a headache. Big deal. I'm accustomed to them by now. The migraine medicine we got in Aruba is actually helping a lot, but it's not getting rid of it completely. Courtney breathed a sigh of relief. Be grateful for that, Harrison. My guess is that it is a migraine, and that this will get rid of it completely once you've taken the medicine long enough. Once you run out of the Aruban's medicine, you may be able to get some here on the boat. Good thinking, Courtney. Want some of my leftover dinner? Courtney rolled her eyes and pointed at the table. Harrison, it's raw. I can't imagine anyone eating raw meat. I thought the rare meat was bad enough. Besides, the doctor said you shouldn't be eating it. I doubt one more piece will kill me. Besides, I have a very strong urge to eat raw meat for some reason. Maybe it's bringing out my wild side. Harrison chuckled strangely. It sounded almost like a cross between a laugh and a growl. 50 minutes before Moonrisum/S Nordum Cooper stateroom, the phone rang, and Harrison hurried to pick it up. Yes. Mr. Cooper, this is the caterer. Your cake's all ready. Do you want us to write something on it? How about Happy 30th, Courtney? Fine with us. We'll see you in an hour in the top deck cocktail lounge. Minutes before Moonrisum/S Nordum Cooper stateroom, Courtney glanced up from her book at the sky. The shadows had changed, and they were changing in a way which didn't make sense. She stood, dropping her book on the table, and watched the horizon. Sure enough, the sun was moving. Frowning, she brought the book back inside and turned to her husband. Harrison, we're turning around. Harrison blinked at her. His eyes seemed oddly dilated. What? We're turning around. Something strange is going on here. Harrison shrugged. Don't worry about it. There could be a reef down there we're trying to avoid. Trust them, Courtney. They know what we're doing. If I were you, I'd focus on the cocktail party coming up in half an hour. Wear the red dress. Minutes before moonrise, Harrison, dressed in an expensive suit and tie, glanced over to the balcony one last time as he prepared to lock the door and head to the cocktail lounge. Was it his imagination, or was the boat moving backwards? No. Shrugging and wishing that someone would turn down the lights, he took his wife's arm and headed to the elevator 18 minutes before moonrise. A few hundred feet over the Atlantic, Jarrett, Husing, stared wildly across the empty ocean. It should be here. What the hell is going on? Where is it? It's getting dark. Maybe one of you people can see it. Jan shook his head. I don't see it. Spread out and search. Now, 16 minutes before moonrise, the two elevators dinged simultaneously. The left door opened, admitted Harrison and his wife, and closed about the time the right door opened to reveal several crew members armed to the teeth with rubber bullets and tranquilizer darts. They immediately filed out of the elevator and began heading towards the Cooper's stateroom 13 minutes before moonrise. The security agent knocked loudly on the stateroom door. Mr. Cooper, are you there? Something's come up, and we need to talk to you. It's about your illness. There was no answer. 10 minutes before moonrise, Harrison and Courtney settled into their seats in the cocktail lounge. It was full of people, maybe 50 or 60. Most of them were elderly, but there were a few other honeymooners there. They waited for the show to start. Courtney looked outside and saw that the glass windows were showing a good view of the Earth's shadow projected against the sky and wake beyond the bow of the ship. Harrison was right. They were facing southeast. They were moving backwards 9 minutes before moonrise. The sharp-eyed wizard was scanning the horizon. There, I see them. That way. Jarrett nodded. Thank God, Richard. Everyone go. 7 minutes before moonrise, the first officer looked at his watch. 7 minutes, we're running out of time. Open that door. The security officer brought out the master key, and the door clicked open. They rushed in, ready for anything. The stateroom was empty. They were about to close it when they saw some specks silhouetted against the setting sun. They were growing rapidly. The captain whistled. The minister was right. Here come the wizards. 6 minutes before moonrise, Jarrett Husing shook the captain's hand. That's enough, everyone. We can do introductions later. Now we need to find that man and do it within 5 minutes. Otherwise, there will be hell to pay. 4 minutes before moonrise, Courtney and Harrison clapped as the singer came on stage. Courtney's eyes widened as she realized who it was. You're kidding. You convinced Holland America to bring her on this trip. Harrison smiled. We caught a break, honey. She was actually going to be flying from Aruba to Curacao at the time as part of a tour, so we managed to make it so she came on the boat instead. I paid most of the fee to change her ticket, though. Thank you so much. This is such a surprise. Harrison grinned at her evilly. Trust me, there's another surprise coming. Just wait. 2 minutes before moonrise, Jarrett swore. The boat's too damn big. We'll never be able to find him in time. Do you have a PA system? The captain winced. It does, but we can only activate it from the bridge. It will take a good 5 to 10 minutes to get up there. Shit, all right, I think we're going to have to call in the backup. There's no way we're going to get to him in time. Have the backup surround the ship, watch the exits, and listen for animal sounds. Get your tranquilizer darts at the ready, and do not use lethal force unless you have absolutely no alternative. Moonrise. The singer had just finished her first song when the first rays of the moon broke over the horizon. Courtney was clapping vigorously. Harrison started clapping when suddenly his jaw dropped, and he began wincing in pain. Courtney blinked and turned to him. Was it his imagination, or did he seem to have more hair than he usually did? Harrison. Harrison didn't respond. Instead, he just shook. He put his hand to his mouth and raced for the men's room. Whatever was affecting him was spreading rapidly, and he was barely able to stumble into the bathroom and close the door behind him. This was not right, she thought. Concerned, she excused herself and began walking towards the bathroom. Harrison, you okay in there? What's going on? Meanwhile, the Vietnamese couple which had been sitting next to them turned to her and asked, what happened to him? She shook her head in confusion. We're not sure, but the doctor thinks it's a migraine. He should. That was as far as she got before her comment, and the singer's music was completely overwhelmed by a sound she had only heard once before, in a documentary on Yellowstone National Park in the United States. It was the howl of a wolf, and it seemed to be coming from the bathroom 15 seconds after moonrise. Captain Xavier Pendable, Usson retired, looking dapper in his new red shirt, had just sat down on the toilet seat when the door slammed open and some raced into the bathroom. Looking underneath the door, he caught a glimpse of the new person's shadow as he stood in front of the sink. Whoever it was didn't seem particularly happy, judging by the sounds. He must have eaten something which disagreed with him. Xavier sympathized with the poor man. He'd come down with the runs a couple of times himself on international trips and knew that it was quite irritating. The man started making awful sounds, and Xavier saw the man's shadow writhe underneath the door. Xavier frowned. Was the man that sick? If so, he figured he should at least try to help. Taking a moment to pull up his pants, he put his hand on the latch that would open the door. A piercing howl split the air. It reverberated in Xavier's skull and lasted a good 30 seconds. Xavier froze. That did not sound normal. If anything, it sounded more like a dog than a human being. He wondered if the man was insane. Feeling a bit disgusted with himself that he was too chicken to help the sick man, he sat back down on the toilet seat. He didn't want to come face to face with a madman. Besides, that noise should have alerted everyone in the cocktail lounge that something was amiss. The security agents should come for him soon. Grateful that the door protected him from whoever it was, he waited for the people to pick him up. Outside the stall, the person still on all fours started making snuffling sounds. He heard soft footsteps approaching his stall, and he began wondering if the man would be crazy enough to try to get under the door. The newcomer soon got close enough to the door for Xavier to see the sick man's feet. They ended in dog-like claws and were covered in fur. What the hell was going on here? Has the sick man been attacked by his dog? He tried to back up onto the toilet as far as he could. Whenever it was stopped outside, the furry creature sniffed a little more, then suddenly growled. Xavier experienced a brief moment of alarm when the door was struck by a tremendous blow. The latch gave way, and the door opened. For the first time, Xavier got a good look at the sick man, and found himself staring into the drooling face of a 6-foot monster. The creature was clad in the tattered remains of a cashmere suit. The former seaman had time for one brief scream, and then the monster was upon him 25 seconds after moonrise. The howl was audible throughout the entire front half of the ship. Curious, people began opening the doors to their staterooms and began asking each other what was going on. A few intrepid souls headed for the elevator. They didn't know what had happened. All they could tell is that the sound had come from the top deck somewhere. Everyone on the top deck heard the howl, bow to stern. Most of the people in the stern began wandering towards the bow in an attempt to see what was going on 30 seconds after moonrise. Theo Van Dijk recognized the sound immediately, as did every single other member of the backup team watching the ship from above. It was coming from the front of the ship, on one of the top decks. He signaled to his broom and began following the rest of the wizards in its general direction 35 seconds after moonrise. The captain heard the howl from the middle of the ship. The first officer looked at him and nodded. "That's what we need to deal with. That's the rabid dog. Listen to that howl. Get your rubber bullets and tranquilizer darts ready, and let's get up there." 40 seconds after moonrise, the howl went on and on. Courtney started walking towards the bathroom, worried. She couldn't go in there, but perhaps she could ask Harrison from outside the room if he was all right. Meanwhile, the singer had stopped her performance and was asking everyone to keep calm. Realizing her intent, the Vietnamese man who had been sitting next to her offered to help. "That must be some migraine. I'll see if." That was far as he got before a second scream pierced the room. This one was absolutely human and was filled with terror and pain. It abruptly cut off in a gurgle after maybe 5 seconds. The Vietnamese man swore and started heading towards the bathroom. Meanwhile, the singer told everyone to slowly make their way towards the exit. Turning to Courtney, the Asian held up his hand. "This does not sound right. Ma'am, go back to your stateroom and bring back any medicines he's taking. I'll go into the bathroom and check him out. I have a bit of a medical background and no CPR. Hurry." Courtney nodded nervously and raced out of the room, heading for the elevator. Within seconds, she was gone, not knowing that she would be one of the lucky ones. Meanwhile, the man opened the bathroom door and took a look inside. His eyes widened, and he froze in shock. "What the hell?" His remark was interrupted by a loud growl, followed by a bestial charging sound. The Vietnamese had time for one word. The crowd screamed and began racing for the exits, just as a figure from a horror movie crashed into the Vietnamese man and bit him on the arm. To the great dismay of the people in the lounge, the monster was blocking one of the main exits to chamber. Already injured and deciding to take one for the team, the Vietnamese man body slammed the monster out of the way of the exit, opening the floodgates. The delay allowed the monster to bite 2 more people, and the 2 new screams only exacerbated the crowd's panic. 60 screaming people flooded out of the cocktail lounge, followed closely by a werewolf sporting a bloody muzzle and a torn cashmere suit 55 seconds after moonrise. Theo made his way around the bridge tower and caught his first glimpse of the bow section of the top deck. The place was an absolute madhouse. People were screaming and running in what appeared to be a mass exodus from the cocktail lounge. Some of them headed for the elevator, others for the staircase. A few of the older people, who had limited mobility, propelled their wheelchairs as quickly as they could. One of the laggards suddenly disappeared, his wheelchair flying out from under him. Meanwhile, the front ranks of the flood of people ran into the throng who had made their way from the stern to see what had happened. A few of the people from the stern were trampled. The rest were infected by the escapees' panic and began running along with them. Theo told everyone to get ready. The creature which had been Harrison, was likely chasing these people and would almost certainly pursue them out of the cocktail lounge into the open. Once he was exposed, the wizards would stun him. They didn't have time for the tranquilizer darts, and they were concerned that the Muggle dart guns weren't accurate enough to guarantee a hit on the werewolf, and not one of the fleeing people. Knocking a fleeing person unconscious would just provide Harrison a good meal. 1:10 after moonrise. Courtney Cooper unlocked her door and entered her stateroom. She had to hurry. She had no idea what had happened to her husband. Did the migraine medicine have side effects which caused increased nausea and temporary insanity? She hoped not. She looked at the box and saw that the instructions were written in two languages, Dutch and some Creole dialect, which looked somewhat like a cross between Spanish and Dutch. Great, she thought. However, the biggest word on the bottle looked like it was the name of a medicine. It was one of those typical words which looked like the name of a prescription. She stuck the bottle in her pocket and hurried out the door. As she left the room, she noticed that the door to the balcony was open. She grunted in surprise. She could have sworn that Harrison had locked the balcony before they had left. Maybe he'd forgotten. Considering the illness he was experiencing, it's quite possible that he had forgotten. She ran towards the elevator, prescription in her pocket. 1:15 after moonrise. Theo watched as the werewolf charged out of the cocktail lounge, howling at the top of its lungs. He ordered the wizards to open fire as he sent a patronus to Jarrett, explaining that all the werewolf was on the top deck and that all wizards should apparate to the entrance to the cocktail lounge immediately. Muggles and wizards nearest the creature should use their tranquilizer guns, and wizards who were further away should use their wands. 1:25 after moonrise. Jarrett Husing turned on the spot and rematerialized on the top deck. However, before he could get his bearings, something slammed into him and knocked the wand from his hand. Spinning to face what had hit him, he saw that he had collided with a 50-yard woman with glasses who had crashed into him at a high rate of speed. The rush of people from the lounge had more or less stopped, and the flood was starting to head down the stairs towards the deck with the open-air swimming pool. He looked around for his wand. It was getting dark, and found it just in time to see the woman fighting with the werewolf. She had her hand in its face, and it had its fangs in her arm. This woman wasn't going to be leaving the ship without a bracelet, he thought. He pointed his wand at the werewolf and cast a stunning spell. The beam hit it in the side and pushed it away from the woman. It staggered a little, but it didn't go down. All the beam seemed to do was irritate it. It turned its baleful gaze on Jarrett as the woman screamed and ran off. Jarrett barely had time to bring up a magical shield before the werewolf reached him. He had a disturbing view of several rows of teeth when the creature's head suddenly crashed into his force field. Jarrett was knocked back momentarily by the impact, but the shield had done its job. The animal was now stationary and out in the open, and its progress was now impeded by the shield. He had to act quickly now. Waving his wand in circular pattern, he cast another spell which trapped the werewolf in a hemispherical force field. The creature howled in frustration as it tried to break through it. However, the field held. It was only a matter of time now. He watched as no fewer than 7 stun beams hit the trapped werewolf simultaneously. 1:40 after moonrise. Courtney Cooper was astonished to find that the elevator wouldn't stop on the top deck for some reason. It let her out on the 9th deck instead. Hoping that those extra seconds wouldn't cost her husband her life, she headed for the stairs. 1:50 after moonrise. The captain and the rest of the ship's security staff burst onto the top deck just as the red beams hit the werewolf. It went down in a lump of fur, grunting somewhat, but still alive. The security staff raised their guns to punish it further, but hesitated when they saw that a man in a wizard's robes was standing between them and the monster. The wizard sensed their presence and spun. "Captain Devries, thank Merlin. It's over, don't harm him. Sedate the werewolf so he will sleep for the rest of the night. Use an amount of tranquilizer for a 200-pound rabid dog. Hurry, as the shield and stunning spell won't work for long. We'll then put him alone in a lifeboat and seal him off until the morning." The wizard, the captain, quickly realized it was Gerrit Husing, moved out of the way as the Muggles brought out their tranquilizer guns. The darts hit home, and soon the grunting stopped, and the werewolf fell asleep. No fewer than 10 wizards immediately converged on the animal, grabbed onto any part of it they could, and then disappeared. 20 seconds later, the wizards returned and reported that the animal was safely quarantined in a lifeboat. The entire incident had taken less than 2 minutes. However, the damage had been done. A quick survey of the top deck revealed that there were no fewer than 10 dead people, primarily senior citizens. The big question, though, involved the number of people who had been bitten. Husing explained that he had seen one woman bitten himself. The captain looked around the top deck and checked for people who were bleeding. He saw 12 people bleeding on the top deck alone, all of them with puncture marks which seemed to have come from fangs. One of the wizards reported that there are few more injured people on the lower decks, and predicted that the attack had produced between 20 and 25 new werewolves. The captain and wizards immediately began issuing orders. Every single person injured in the attack, every single one, was to speak with a wizard as soon as possible. They would not be permitted off the boat until they had done so. Anyone with any scarring or blood whatsoever would not be allowed to set foot on Curacao until they had first contacted a wizard. Husing had a stroke of inspiration. He headed to the main entrance, the only place where people got on and off the boat, and cast a spell over the entrance which would prevent anyone with blood on them from leaving unless they had a wizard-made ankle bracelet. Normally, this spell was used to keep patients in hospitals. In this case, however, it would keep everyone on the boat long enough to halt the werewolf pandemic once and for all. 2:30 after moonrise. Courtney Cooper reached the top deck and stopped in her tracks when she saw what had happened. There was blood everywhere, and most of the beach chairs had been tossed around as if by a tornado. There were no fewer than 10 people lying on the ground. 8 were clearly dead, and 2 were whimpering weakly and clutching various body parts. She wasn't a doctor, however. She didn't know what had happened, but there wasn't anything she could do about. Perhaps the Vietnamese man would be able to handle it. He seemed quite capable. She forced her way over to the cocktail lounge. A door had been blown off, and she had no idea how that had happened when someone in robes stopped her. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's been an incident, and we're not letting anyone in." Courtney stared at him. "Let me in, please. My husband, Harrison Cooper, is very sick. He was nauseous and acting strange, and the last thing I know, he ran into the bathroom." The wizards looked at the man next to him sharply, then asked, "You're Courtney Cooper?" Courtney blinked. "Yes, how did you know my name?" "We're with the Dutch Ministry of Magic. We know why your husband was sick, and we know how to take care of him. What did the doctors tell you he had?" They first thought food allergies, but the pills didn't work. Then they figured he had migraines, and I've got his migraine pills here. However, first things first, we need to save my husband. The wizard hesitated. "I have some good news and bad news. The good news is that he is in a safe place where he will not be a danger to himself or to other people because of his illness. Ignore the pills the Muggle doctors gave you. Their diagnosis was by necessity wrong, as they don't know magical diseases. He will not experience any more symptoms for 3 weeks, and the remaining symptoms will be alleviated with some treatment he will be undergoing for the rest of his life. We only ask that he visit us for treatment once a month at the full moon. Courtney breathed a sigh of relief. That's good to know. Where is he now? I'd like to talk to him. He's sealed in a lifeboat, Mrs. Cooper. He cannot be exposed to other human beings until tomorrow morning because he will attack them and possibly spread the disease. That's the bad news, Mrs. Cooper. He's got a disease which will be with him for the rest of his life. Courtney had to know, what disease does he have? Lycanthropy. Courtney narrowed her eyes, baffled. Huh, what's that? The first wizard stared at her hard. He's become a werewolf, and most of the Western European wizarding community has been looking for him for a month. Furthermore, anyone who survives his bite will also become a lycanthrope and need treatment. I must ask, Mrs. Cooper, were you bitten? She shook her head. No, I missed all of this stuff when I went downstairs to get Harrison's pills when he started howling and screaming in the bathroom. You're very fortunate, Mrs. Cooper. At any rate, your husband is now a werewolf. He will turn into this creature once every month, immediately upon the rising of the full moon. While in wolf form, he will be a danger to anyone around him, including you, unless he follows our treatment rigorously. When he wakes up the next morning, he will be back to his normal self and have no idea what he did while in wolf form. Courtney stared at him. What? Tell me everything. The wizard complied, and Courtney's life was changed forever. Chapter 203, Oil Embargo. Sunday, June 2, 1996, Royal Palace Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Horcruxes left. 1. Cup Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3 King Fahd had never expected that he would actually be helping the Israelis. However, he felt that it was his duty to do so. He had been indirectly responsible for getting the Death Eaters into Israel to begin with, so it was imperative that he and Minister Dagher work with Mikkel Oved to get them out of there. Many people in his cabinet had mixed feelings about what to do with the Israelis now that most of the Hamas Death Eaters had been taken care of. The Death Eaters had gotten a bit more wary ever since the Israeli raid had taken out Rodolphus Lestrange. There had been a few more instances of magical terrorism, missiles portkeyed into buildings, that type of stuff, but nothing on the scale of what Hamas had been doing earlier with Esh Elohim and the Dan Hotel. Many people figured that Voldemort would be more reluctant to risk his Hamas operatives, as he knew that a Hamas without Death Eaters would be easy pickings for a mobilized Mikkel Oved. The problem was that with the wizards out of the picture, the old Middle East conflict reared its ugly head once more. Israel still controlled the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and many people argued that the dearth of wizards in Hamas would give Israel the perfect excuse to use its own wizards to take control of the disputed territories for good. Since Hamas had used wizards against Israel, the Israelis would believe that a magical response was justified, even though no wizards were left to defend the Palestinians. Fahd was under increasing pressure to scale back his assistance to the Israelis, now that the immediate crisis with Rodolphus Lestrange had passed. Right now, Hamas was leading Israel on a merry chase all over the West Bank. The Muggle side of the movement had been reinvigorated by Rodolphus's presence and had become very active since Rodolphus's death. They had begun focusing on low-personnel, high-impact missions, which generally involved stolen mortars and tanks. It was only a matter of time until the old animosities flared up again. Fahd argued that they needed to keep the pressure on Hamas until all of the connections to the wizarding world were completely gone. For one thing, Voldemort could always resupply the movement with wizards. For another, the wizards could easily go after Saudi Arabia once they destroyed Israel. Finally, any war between Hamas and Israel could very likely plunge the whole world into conflict, even without Voldemort's help. Israel wasn't the king's main concern at the moment, however. He looked at the map on his wall at North Korea. There were disturbing rumors that Voldemort had taken control of North Korea and was impersonating the general who had succeeded Kim Jong-il. He had seen video footage of Chang Sung-teik entering a bathroom, after which the camera had followed him in and discovered that he was Voldemort. The North Korean leader, of course, denied it and argued that he, the dear leader, had been ensorcelled and Voldemort had attended the meeting in his place. Voldemort obviously worked for the South, the North said. He was British, and Britain was capitalist. The British had promptly responded by arguing that the authorities should check Chang Sung-tik's wand and see who it was registered to Voldemort or Chang Sung-tik. The general had handed over the wand, of course, and the investigation had concluded that the wand had been registered to a Choi Yoon-lee, a North Korean witch who had defected to the South and had been killed in the Kim Jong-il coup. Chang Sung-tik praised the result and explained that it was proof he wasn't Voldemort. The British then countered with footage indicating that the wand he had given to the investigators was not his original wand, and that he was deliberately using Choi Yoon's wand to throw off the trail. Voldemort naturally said that the British wizards had faked everything, including the footage. The dispute went on and on. Dagger had been paying close attention to anything involving the Death Eaters ever since Rickpreet had placed the king under the Imperious curse. He had examined a great deal of footage of the North Korean leader and was of the opinion that the British were right. Voldemort had taken over the country. The minister had shown him 2 videotapes taken a few days apart. It was obvious that the dear leader had swapped wands with someone else and had replaced his own with Choi Yoon's. Dagger argued that Voldemort certainly had interest in controlling Muggle nations. Fard couldn't deny that, as the Dark Lord had nearly taken over England and had effectively controlled Saudi Arabia by proxy for a while. Fard was determined to make Voldemort pay for what the Dark Lord had done to him. Although he couldn't attack North Korea directly, he couldn't risk his soldiers with Israel, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas running around. He was certain that the North Koreans wouldn't be able to do much good against a modern army without a mixture of wizards and Muggles defending the country. Fard couldn't do much about the wizards. However, he was considering a nasty strike which would cripple the North's Muggle army and make it easier for people to attack Voldemort. The Muggle army may be well equipped and well trained. However, it used lots of mechanized equipment such as aircraft, tanks, and jeeps. Every single one of these machines needed lubrication, and the vast majority of them were designed so that they were lubricated with one thing. He wondered whether OPEC would be willing to commit to an oil embargo against North Korea, and to any nation which supported North Korea. It was a gamble, but something to think about. Hamas headquarters location, classified Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The sheik looked around the room and grinned. Well, it looks like we've fooled the Zionists. They have no idea we're here, and we're able to tie down many of their forces by sending 1 or 2 people over there, driving around in a tank for a while, portkeying in a few missiles, and returning here. Well done. Now it's time to step things up a notch and try something big while their army is spread thin, and the entire Knesset is in an uproar due to the change of prime ministers. The last remaining Hamas wizard nodded. Makes sense, sir. What were you thinking of doing? The sheik grinned. We need to re-establish the primacy of Islam in Jerusalem. This Suleiman I, or whatever his name, is now betrayed us by opening the Al-Aqsa Mosque to non-Muslims. Why? Someone he thinks is the ghost of a biblical leader tells him. That sounds a bit suspicious to me, does it not? Particularly since Samuel's word was for the most part superseded by Mohammed's. Many of the people in the room nodded. One of them asked, "Sounds reasonable. We haven't done something big for a while. What were you thinking?" In response, the sheik showed everyone a poster which showed the dome of the rock shining on top of the Temple Mount. At the bottom of the photograph was the Western Wall, the last surviving relic of the classical Jewish temple. The sheik pointed at the wall. Those Portkeys are very good at destroying buildings made of steel and reinforced concrete. They should have no problem knocking down a 2,000-year-old wall obstructing Muslim access to the mosque. M/S Nordum Willemstad Curak. The first thing Harrison Cooper noticed when he woke up was that the bed was as hard as a rock. What had happened? Had he gotten drunk at Courtney's surprise party and fallen asleep at the bar? He looked around the room to get his bearings, at which point he experienced his second shock. He was alone in what appeared to be a lifeboat. He was wearing the tattered remains of his cashmere suit, which irritated him to no end because he had spent a lot of money on it. What had happened? Why was his suit torn up, and why was he sitting in the lifeboat? Suddenly, it occurred to him. Someone had identified his disease and determined he was contagious. The last thing he remembered was running to the bathroom in the cocktail lounge and wanting to throw up. The next thing he knew, he was here. There must have been a doctor in the house, and the doctor had treated him, figured out what he had, and told him that he should be quarantined. In the process, the doctor must have given him something to cure the nausea and headaches, as both symptoms had abruptly vanished. But if he was ill, why wasn't there a doctor there with him? The doctor could always wear protective gear while treating him. Something still didn't seem right here. He walked over to the door and opened it. It wouldn't open. What the hell? He started banging on it and screaming for help. Eventually, help arrived. However, it was not a doctor. His welcoming committee consisted of no fewer than 15 people. He recognized his wife. The others, however, looked like a combination of security guards and wizards. Harrison blinked. What were wizards doing on a cruise ship? Did the captain call a wizard so that the wizard could treat him? One of the wizards pointed a wand at the door and muttered something inaudibly. The door opened, and the wizard entered the lifeboat, followed by Courtney. Courtney had an ashen look on her face, which Harrison didn't like. Don't tell me this disease is fatal, he thought. He was about to ask his wife what had happened when he saw 3 men walk by carrying figure covered by a white shroud. A bloody arm dangled from underneath the shroud. The victim appeared to have been mauled by an animal. The bite marks reminded Harrison eerily of those caused by the creature which had attacked him last month at Wembley. Don't tell me there are more of those creatures around, he thought. If there are, these people need to know about them and how to fight them. My experience could be helpful here. Courtney saw what he was looking at and understood immediately. When she spoke, it was very carefully. Yes, Harrison, these wounds were caused by same type of creature that attacked you last month. It's a werewolf, a magical animal. It attacked people at the concert. We were as soon as the moon rose. Harrison swore. That's terrible. Were there many fatalities? Is there anything I can do? And it's a magical creature. No wonder my injury couldn't be healed easily. All you can do is cooperate with us, I'm afraid. There are 11 dead and 23 bitten. Harrison whistled and turned to the wizard. 11 dead. That's horrible. How did such an animal get onto the boat? I ran into one of them earlier, in case Courtney didn't tell you. One of them bit me in England last month. The wizard nodded. I'm aware of that, Mr. Cooper. As for where the animal came from, well, let me explain to you how lycanthropy, that is, the state of being a transforming creature like a werewolf, works. Werewolves transform into creatures similar to the one that attacked you as soon as the full moon rises. While in wolf form, they will attack anyone in their vicinity with a powerful bite. Harrison nodded. That sounds about right, considering what happened to me at the football stadium. We were lucky we only lost one person there. The wizard hesitated and shook his head. On the contrary, in cases like this one could argue that death is preferable to being bitten. Harrison gawked at him. What? Why? The wizard looked at Harrison hard. Because lycanthropy is contagious, transmitted through bites. Any person bitten by such a creature becomes a lycanthrope, him or herself. The victim will start transforming at the next full moon and will become a threat to other people, including those he loves. Harrison's face went white. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that I turned into the monster and attacked those people? That's impossible. I would never do such a thing even if I did turn into a monster. There's nothing you could have done about it, and given the circumstances, no way for you to have known. I'm sorry. What's more, you could not have prevented the attacks because a werewolf will lose his entire sense of self and become a vicious animal inside and out while in wolf form. Harrison turned to his wife. "Do you want to divorce me? I can't imagine attacking you like this." The wizard shook his head and held out something which looked like an ankle bracelet. "You won't need to, because now that we know about you, we can keep track of you and ensure that you receive treatment. Although we can't prevent your transformation, we can stop the headaches and ensure that you are be teleported through magical means to a place where you can transform safely. Follow our instructions, and you will never harm anyone again. I promise." Harrison nodded and put on the anklet. "How long will I be sick?" "For the rest of your life, I'm afraid. There is no known cure for lycanthropy." Harrison swore. "It sounds like something I'll have to get accustomed to. What about those people I bit? Will they start turning into monsters as well?" "Yes, Mr. Cooper. However, we've tracked all of them down, all 23 of them, and placed bracelets on all of them. We were able to catch them all by casting a spell to prevent the injured people from leaving the ship and alerting us when they tried to do so. There will be no more untreated attacks after this. No one else will be hurt." Harrison nodded. "That's good to hear. Now, if you would excuse me, I want to be alone with my wife so I can deal with the tragedy I just caused." The wizard nodded. "Of course, please excuse us." With that, the wizard left the lifeboat and closed the door behind him. Chapter 204, Wet Horcrux. Monday, June 3, 1996, Slytherin Common Room, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Great Britain. Next Path. 205, Cohen Gadel Suleiman, I. Horcruxes left. 1. Cup, Atlantis alert status. DEFCON 3 Draco Malfoy put down the note from Lisa Van Papel with a combination of pride and fear. Pride because Voldemort had accepted his double agent role as the initiation rite to be admitted into the Death Eaters. He was frightened, however, when Voldemort immediately began sending him on missions. Didn't the Dark Lord know about owls? He was in the middle of owls right now, and couldn't spend much time doing stuff other than studying. Lucius, however, demanded that the Death Eater work come first. He argued that, when Voldemort took over the world from his base in North Korea, Draco would be given plum positions and high honors regardless of how many owls he had achieved. Connections to the Dark Lord would go far during Voldemort's reign, whereas the ability to turn a mouse into a teacup would be pointless. These two missions, however, wouldn't take long. If things went as planned, he'd be able to go to Gringotts and return in half an hour or less. Looking at the note one last time, he picked up the key to Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, left the castle, picked up a broom he had hidden in a tree, and flew over to Gringotts. Draco's mission involved protecting two of Voldemort's favorite relics from possible tampering by members of the Order of the Phoenix. Voldemort suspected that the Order may have found out about these items and was sending agents out to check to see if they were still there. If they were to be protected using any means possible. If they weren't, Voldemort was to know about it immediately. Draco had been given custody of two relics, the Ravenclaw tiara and the Hufflepuff cup. The tiara was in the Room of Requirement, and the cup was in Bellatrix's vault at Gringotts, which he had conveniently inherited. He would be the only Death Eater who even had access to those. He presented the key to the goblin at the front desk. The goblin nodded, picked up some noise-making devices he called clankers, and escorted Draco into a magical cart. The cart made its way deep into the bowels of the earth and eventually stopped in a room with a dragon in it. Draco nearly wet his pants when he saw the dragon. However, the goblin explained that the dragon was afraid of the clankers and would not attack anyone as long as the clankers were in the room. The goblin took Draco's key, walked up to the door of the vault, and performed an odd ritual in front of the door. The door unlocked and opened of its own volition. It took a while for him to find the cup. Eventually, he did. It was sitting up on one of the top shelves between a book and a hand of glory. Draco asked the goblin to summon a ladder, and it did. He then told the goblin to leave the room and come back in 15 minutes. The goblin nodded, left the clankers with Draco, and left. Draco climbed up to the top shelves and took down the cup with trembling fingers. He didn't know why Voldemort liked this object. Then again, he was Voldemort's obedient servant. As a supporter of the Dark Lord, Draco would protect it with everything he could think of. His studying for the owls had given him a lot of experience with the arcane, and he put it all to good use. First, he cast the Geminio charm on the cup a few dozen times and threw worthless duplicates all over the vault. That would make it more difficult for the Order of the Phoenix to identify the original. He was certain they would ask him to open the vault for them. Once they found out there was a Horcrux here and that he had the key. Next, he cast a disillusionment charm on the original it, which made it virtually undetectable. He also made it unplottable and muggle-repelling so that no muggles would be able to find it. The last spell was the trickiest one, and he hadn't gotten much opportunity to practice it. Speaking the incantation carefully, he cast the Fidelius charm and assigned Voldemort to be the secret keeper for the cup's location. There was a burst of magic, and the original vanished from his sight for about 2 minutes. Then it reappeared in his hand, only to vanish again. Draco frowned. What was going on? Had the spell failed? It finally occurred to him that he was still able to see the cup because he had been the one to cast the spell. Other people wouldn't be as lucky. A quick magic detection spell revealed that something fishy was going on with the cup which hadn't been there before. Ergo, the Fidelius had worked. Draco shrugged. Maybe he didn't know the spell as well as he had thought. Inspired, he chose one of the duplicates in the vault at random and Fideliused it to Voldemort as well. It would make a good red herring. It started flickering in and out as well. Slipping the relic under his robes, he left the vault, closed the door, and summoned the goblin. As an afterthought, he cast a spell across the entrance to the vault which would prevent anyone other than himself or Lucius from entering it. The goblin saw him do this and actually thought it was a good idea. They were the only 2 people who had keys, after all. 10 minutes later, he was outside Hogwarts, his mission complete. He had the original cup in his possession and was about to check on the tiara. However, he figured he had to do something to hide the cup first. He couldn't just bring it into his room, as anyone could take it, including the traitor Snape. He had to put it somewhere where no one could find it. He knew the perfect place. Summoning a boat, he rowed out to the center of the lake. After a brief look around to make sure no one was watching him, he dropped the cup into the lake. It sank to the bottom like a stone. One relic had been saved, Draco thought. It was now time to deal with the tiara. Grinning, he re-entered Hogwarts, heading for the room of requirement. He'd be probably studying for his owls again within 15 minutes at the rate things were going a few hours later. Voldemort was not a happy man. OPEC had issued an oil embargo against North Korea, and the Saudis had provided incontrovertible evidence that he had been masquerading as Chang Tsung-Tik all along. Several other countries with powerful ministries of magic were following suit and prohibiting commerce between North Korea and their citizens. As if that weren't bad enough, he was fairly certain that if people weren't after his Horcruxes, they would be soon. Thankfully, none had been destroyed, yet other than the snake and the diary. However, the simple fact was that Dumbledore had been investigating the ring. That couldn't be good. He had to admit, however, that he liked Draco's plan of throwing the Horcruxes in the lake and planning a few surprises for anyone who tried to go after the tiara and cup. Draco was going to be a valuable Death Eater, just like Lucius. The Dark Lord was going to tell everyone else to do the same thing when he got a chance to the other Horcruxes. First things first, he needed to get a better wand. He couldn't use Choi Yun's anymore as quickly as possible because he had to assume that he couldn't rely on Horcruxes for his survival. This meant the Elder Wand. He needed to find the Elder Wand and do so in a hurry. He'd send the Death Eaters out en masse to scour the world for the legendary Deathstick. He also needed something to distract the Muggles. He told his troops near the DMZ to get ready and increase their alert level. A war with the South would certainly take a lot of the pressure off him. However, it would take a while for Lucius to go through the army, enchanting all the tanks and so forth. A war would help for the intermediate and long term. Short term, however, was a different story. Fortunately, he had a solution for that as well. Making certain the sliver of U-235 was securely inside its lead container, he called over the Sheik and Kuri. Pointing Choi Yoon's wand at a radiation suit behind him, he duplicated the suit twice and ordered the two men to put on the duplicates. He then put on his own suit and opened the box. Kuri looked at the small sliver of metal and gasped. "Is that what I think it is, my lord?" Voldemort nodded. "Yes, Arif. It's pure uranium-235I extracted from one of the North Korean reactors under construction. I'll make several duplicates of this for you so you can use them for your own purposes. I'd say this would make a pretty good distraction." The Sheik touched the piece of metal. As he had hoped, it was warm the touch. Praising Allah enthusiastically, he asked, "Thank you so much. How do we turn it into a bomb?" Voldemort chuckled. "Have a wizard Geminio it a few times so you can have multiple nukes. Carry the sliver to the target in a knapsack, thermos, portkey, whatever. To detonate the device, cast Engorgio on the uranium a few times to get it over critical, and then a compressio maximus to get it to chain reaction density. If I were you, I would put a delayed activation on these spells to give you enough time to get out before the bomb goes off." Kuri whistled. "How big a weapon do you think this will be?" Voldemort shrugged. "To be honest, I don't really know. My guess, though, is that we should get something about the size of the Nagasaki bomb, somewhere around 25 kilotons. It's a small weapon as far as nukes go, but it will be enough. At the very least, you will have something to show to the West if the world calls our bluff. The only thing that I ask is that you clear any attempt to use a nuclear weapon with me. Is that all right?" Both Kuri and the Sheik nodded. They'd probably have agreed to anything just to get their hands on the nukes.